Hello everyone, welcome to Black Fog, your guide for drifting off. I know you listen to help you fall asleep, so like and subscribe to Black Fog before we start. Where are you from and what's your time? Now get comfortable and relax. I found myself unable to get out of bed for hours most days. I would check the time on my phone and see her on my lock screen, smiling, with the sun hitting her little brown curls. In bed, I would go through my photos, looking at the pictures and videos of her, memorizing every word, taking every little piece of her I could find and trying to hold it close. It had only been 2 weeks. Jeff had been dealing with it his own way, going to a church group every night the last few days. I hadn't been able to talk about it, especially to strangers. Tonight, I was going with him. He had begged me to try it, said they were kind people. Even if I wanted to leave after 1 minute, they would all understand. The sun was setting over a well-trimmed lawn. The church itself looked old. A small building with a white steeple and brick walls, glowing in the warm light. I didn't recognize the denomination on the sign, which only read Church of the New Dawn. The well-worn brass door handle clicked under Jeff's thumb, opening into a small meeting hall. Larger doors into the main church were closed, and about a dozen people chatted happily around a couple trays of cookies. An older man with gray hair and sunspots pushed up his glasses as he walked toward us, offering a hand to Jeff. "Earl, good to see you." They warmly shook hands. "You must be Susan." "I'm Earl. So glad you could make it. I hear you're a teacher down at Hamilton Elementary." "Yes, for about 6 years now. My granddaughter goes there. She's in 2nd grade, Kayla Oatman." I'd met her, a nice girl, and told him as much. When a man wearing a black collar with the typical white square in the center approached, I knew he must be Reverend Silas. "Susan, so nice to meet you. I'm Reverend Silas Greenbaum." "A pleasure to meet you, Reverend." He was friendly and polite, with a projecting voice, which could be heard clearly even though he wasn't speaking loudly. Small streaks of gray peppered his temples, but his hair was otherwise thick and dark. I guessed him to be about 40. Over the next few minutes, everyone introduced themselves to me, with the exception of a lanky teenage boy sitting on a chair in the corner. He wore large sunglasses and hadn't moved from his seat since we arrived. "Charles, come over and say hi, please." Charles was the Reverend's son, it seemed. He slowly walked over, patent leather shoes stopping on the tiles as the Reverend put an arm around him. First, he talked to Jeff. "I'm glad you're here," he said. The Reverend nodded at me, and he turned reluctantly. "Hi, I'm Charles." His voice was flat, disinterested. I wondered if that was due to having to go to church every night as a teenage boy, or something else. "His eyes are light-sensitive. The sunglasses help him," the Reverend added. Charles walked straight back to the corner and took a seat. Soon enough, everyone picked up a chair and made a circle in the middle of the room. Earl talked about church business, such as bringing food and company to the members of the church unable to leave their houses. I respected a church where people put effort into caring for the members of their community. The Reverend stood. Jeff had told me he normally did a small sermon on weeknights. I wanted to speak about providence, the will of God. This would be my first glimpse at what this church actually was about, and I was curious. Jeff was in a vulnerable place, and often people were more susceptible to extreme views after something like that. Everything we say is lucky is in fact the work of God. Just last week, I was in the grocery store, and my son Charles here saw a man holding an onion, just staring at it for a full minute. Jeff laughed, as did a few of the other members. They must have heard this story before. Charles told me, "That man right there, go to him," and I could see he had lost someone. When you lose someone you love more than anything in the world. His voice cracked, and he paused to gather himself. It makes you want to give up, but you can't. For them, you have to keep going. Believe me, children of God, that the ones you love are not lost to God. and they are not gone as long as you will sacrifice yourself the way Jesus sacrificed himself for us so that we may live eternal. You have to sacrifice your pain, let go of how you suffer, and think of others. In a time of loss, it can be the hardest thing to do, but Jeff here has already done it. Just yesterday, Jeff brought dinner to Jean McCall. She can't leave the house, and her husband is in the hospital with a staph infection. As you know, he paused, clearly affected, putting a hand over his mouth. Everyone was silent, listening. She called me and said she'd never had eggplant parmesan before, that it had made her day. Before he showed up, she only got out of bed at 4 in the afternoon because she was so down. She only put clothes on because Jeff was coming. She hadn't eaten all day. But then he showed up with a smile. The eggplant parmesan was one of the best things she'd ever tasted. She was very clear that I had to thank the chef personally, and I'm smart enough to listen to my elders. So thank you, Jeff. You made an old woman's day. A smile crossed Jeff's face. Thank you, Reverend. And Jean already thanked me about 100 times. She's a sweet lady. But one more won't hurt, I guess. The Reverend laughed, and others naturally joined in. It never does. Let's pray. On the drive home, I held Jeff's hand. You didn't tell me you were taking food for that old lady. I thought you were just bringing it to work for lunch. He smiled at me, squeezing my hand, then returning his eyes to the road. I see why you like it there. They seem like good people. Also, you do make a mean eggplant parm. That Saturday, the Reverend was coming over for dinner. Jeff was cooking as usual. I cleaned the place up and was finishing dusting when I got to her picture. Rag in one hand, I picked up the cheap wooden frame with the other. I missed her smile so much. In this picture, she only had 4 teeth. Jeff had her in his arms, and I was hugging them both. After a friendly conversation at dinner, we all went to the living room. Reverend Silas walked straight up to that picture, leaning over to get a good look. She's beautiful. What a blessing to have her, and what suffering to lose her. May God give you strength and grace to face each new day. It is the worst thing in the world to lose your child. He sat on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His eyes were piercing as he looked at me. I lost my wife last year. It was suicide. The Reverend's face was heavy. It was the first I'd heard of it, and I felt for him. I lost her, but I still have my son. I still have Charles. He put a hand on my shoulder. Susan, there's nothing I can say to take away your pain. When I lost, well, I found it helps to think about them rather than thinking about our loss. Maybe we could talk about her a little. I never got to know Claire. At the mention of her name, a knot formed in my throat. I didn't want to talk about it. Where was this? He asked, pointing at the picture on the end table. The Knoxville Zoo. I said, you can see the netting right there in the corner. That was the toucans. She loved those. The cereal she liked had them on the box, and we spent a long time teaching her how to say toucan. It always came out kuka. The whole drive there, she was asking sea toucan. I think she was disappointed at first because it didn't look like the cartoon. But one squawked and flew right by the net, and she loved them after that. I was smiling. I hadn't smiled all day, I don't think. As soon as I realized it, the smile was replaced with sobs. Deep, undignified, wet sobs. Remember those stories. Don't forget them. That's important. After he left, I began putting away dishes. Jeff joined me. You're right. I am glad he came over. I didn't think I would be, but I am. I see why you've been meeting with him. Jeff had talked to Silas alone 2 nights before, after the Bible study. He had gotten home late after midnight. I thought it was a bit strange that he was talking to this man every day of the week, but it seemed to be helping. As I stood at the sink, his arms wrapped around me from behind. I leaned my head back into his chest. Nothing could bring Claire back, but this wasn't the worst night I'd had since Claire passed. At least it wasn't yet. When I woke up, Jeff wasn't in bed. I went to the bathroom and he wasn't there either. Stepping out of the bedroom, I stood in the dark hall. There was a bright enough moon that light came in through the windows, and I could hear his voice, just barely, through an open door. Claire's room. I walked slowly, my bare feet pressing into the cold hardwood. As I neared, I could make out words. Lord, keep her. Please, Lord, I'll do anything. When I stepped into the doorway, I saw Jeff on his knees, facing the moonlit window. I leaned down to hug him, but saw his arms. With a piece of glass, he had slashed both forearms open, and blood was dripping onto the floor. Jeff! Jeff! I screamed, and he looked up at me over his shoulder, face a mask of grief. I drove him to the hospital. They stitched him up just fine, but both of us had to talk to the doctors for a long time before they would let us go. The car ride back was silence for several minutes. Call the Reverend, Jeff said. He needs to know. When we got home, he handed me his phone, and I called him. It was 4 a.m, but I called. Jeff, how'd it go? He said before I could speak. What? I asked. Susan. Hi, how's it going? Sorry, I was asleep. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath. Jeff cut himself pretty bad. I mean, on purpose. I wondered how you're supposed to even say that, and figured I'd done it wrong. I see. Do you want me to come over? Or I could stop by in the morning. I didn't know what to say. I'd barely slept. We'd been in the hospital for a couple hours. My daughter was dead, and I was worried my husband was going to kill himself and leave me alone. When I began sobbing, he spoke. I'll be there in half an hour. Just sit tight. Actually, sorry. Can you give me your address again? Just so I don't have to look for it. When he arrived, he hugged me as soon as I opened the door. We have to be strong. For Jeff and for Claire. It's the hardest thing in the world, but now is our time to be strong. I put on water for tea as the Reverend sat with him on the couch. Jeff was already seeming better than I expected. When the kettle whistled, Reverend Silas said he would get it. Once he was in the kitchen, Jeff took my hand. I'm so sorry, honey. I don't know what came over me. I had a dream about her. And when I woke up, it's okay. It's okay. I took his head in my arms, and we both cried. I didn't notice the Reverend come in with the tea until a minute later. When there's a good time, I'd like to pray with him, he said. I could tell he meant just himself and Jeff. I'm going to, go upstairs and clean, I said. Susan, please let me. Just get the things together and I'll clean it in a little while. It's better you don't have to do it yourself. Trust me. I did trust him. I nodded and went to the kitchen to gather a bucket, gloves, sponges, some detergent. When I returned, the Reverend held Jeff close, speaking in a low voice I couldn't hear. Please come pray with us. Take my hand, Silas said. I knelt on the floor with them, the three of us holding hands in a circle. Dear Lord, hear our prayer tonight. Out of our loss, let there be rebirth. He paused, and Jeff repeated after him. I followed his lead. Out of our loss, let there be rebirth. We answered each call. Out of our pain, let there be strength. As you died for us, that we may have life eternal, let us give of ourselves so that others may live. Amen. Amen, we said. The prayer seemed strange even at the time, but I wrote it off as stress or exhaustion on the Reverend's part. In hindsight, it took on a very, very different tone. The Reverend slept on our couch, and I made sure he had plenty of blankets. Jeff seemed much better, and we actually got a couple of hours of sleep. The next day, I called work to let them know I would be taking another week. My boss took the phone from our receptionist to personally tell me everything was covered and to take my time. They were good people to work with. The Reverend had set things up for me to have dinner with a couple of people from the Bible study, who seemed nice. He wanted someone on one time with Jeff to see if he could facilitate getting professional help. I agreed. Jeff's behavior was worrying me. He said he was feeling much better, but he seemed too much better, too relaxed, too peaceful. I couldn't explain it at the time, I was glad Reverend Silas was trying to get him help. Dinner went well. It was at a woman named Dinah's house who was very sweet and had cooked some good spaghetti, but was not gifted in conversation. I don't hold that against her, since making conversation with a woman you don't know who has a dead daughter and a self-harming husband seems difficult. As I took a bite of garlic bread, I got a coppery taste in my mouth. It's hard to describe, but it unsettled me, and I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Washing my hands under cold water, I looked in the mirror. I saw not myself, but Claire's face, screaming. It was gone in an instant, but rattled me to my core. She looked terrified, mouth wide open, in a mask of fear which I'd never seen in her few years of life. I've never been superstitious. I've never felt like I had any special closeness with God or spirituality or any of that. But when I saw her, I called Jeff immediately. He didn't answer. Neither did the Reverend. I told Dinah thank you for dinner, but that something had come up. I tried calling each of them again, still getting no answer. Putting the car in gear, I drove home much faster than I should have. It was practically asking to hit a deer hauling ass like that at night. The Reverend's car was there, but none of the lights were on. The moon was out and bright again, casting shadows of leafless branches across the white paint of the house. Why weren't the lights on? Why weren't they answering their phones? I rushed up to the front door. It was unlocked. Opening it, I was about to call out for Jeff when I heard a voice speaking. I didn't recognize him at first, but drawing nearer to the stairs, the flat, even diction was unmistakable. It was Charles, the Reverend's son, the awkward one with sunglasses. I didn't know he was coming, and might not have thought much of it if the entire house wasn't dark. Charles's voice was coming from upstairs, and I made my way toward it. Moonlight made its way in through the windows, lighting up the thin white curtains, casting shadows from the banister on each of the steps as I slowly ascended them. I could hear the words more clearly now, some sort of prayer. Maybe that was why they had the lights off. An offering, the greatest of which is life. By his sacrifice of body, we are given eternal life of the soul in the kingdom of heaven. Shivers went down my spine. Something was very, very wrong with his voice. I'd never heard anything so cold. I can't explain why, but I snuck toward the voice, not afraid of interrupting the prayer, but afraid that he would notice me. When I found its source, I felt a pang of disgust. They were in Claire's room. The door was open, and each step showed me more of the scene. I saw the Reverend, kneeling with bowed head, hands clasped in prayer. I saw the silhouette of Charles in front of the window, a black outline with hands raised to the sky. Then finally I saw Jeff. He knelt on the floor, where I had found him 2 nights before. His blood was still on the ground, dried and black under his knees. There was some kind of circle around him in what I think was salt. On the floor in front of him was a picture of Claire, but what drew my eye was the gun in his hand, pointed at his temple. You, Jeff, can give the gift of eternal life, a selfless sacrifice, in the eyes of God, for your daughter, Claire. Repeat after me. I give my life to you. I give my life to you. I give my soul to you. There was no mistaking what was happening. As horrific and unbelievable as it was, I cried out, desperate, Jeff, no, you can't do this. He turned to me, face half cast in shadow, with tears pouring down his cheeks. I'm so sorry, honey. I can't live without her, but she can live. His voice trembled. Say the words. I give my soul to you. Charles's voice reverberated through the room, deafening, undeniable. I cowered back from the door unintentionally and heard Jeff begin to speak the words. No, this is wrong, honey. Please, Reverend, stop this. The Reverend looked at me, still kneeling submissively, sadness in his eyes. You can't stop them. Not this late. I tried once. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to take the gun. When I moved forward, Charles stepped toward me, and I froze. Even in the dim light, I could see his eyes. They were glazed, like a corpse's, a haze over his irises and pupils. In the moonlight, they glowed. They glowed like the bare skin of someone you loved under the lights of a coroner's table. They glowed like the bones of the last person on earth under a dying sun. They glowed like death. You cannot go back. You cannot deny her. Do it. Now, Charles ordered. The gunshot flashed, a yellow light contrasting the moon. Jeff crumpled limply to the ground, and I screamed. As I staggered toward him, the Reverend bowed low, placing his palms on the floor. In the center of the salt circle, standing over Jeff, stood a diminutive figure in a dress with curly hair. Her nose was Claire's little nose. Her lips were the small, pouty lips of my daughter, which used to kiss me on the cheeks. At her sides hung the tiny, soft hands I remembered so well, with their little nails. Her eyes looked at me, unfamiliar, with a white luminescence. I'm from Haryana, aka the land of ghee, galis, and great-hearted people. Contrary to what movies may show, not everyone here is a wrestler or a buffalo whisperer. We're chill. Most of us are into farming, food, and full-on hospitality. And don't even get me started on our language. Haryanvi isn't just a dialect. It's a whole vibe. You've either laughed with it or been scolded into silence by it. Anyway, in 2023, my family and I decided to do something wild, move to Delhi. Because clearly we weren't stressed enough already. We finally found a 3 BHK apartment in a super posh Delhi colony that screamed expensive from the moment we saw the nameplate. It wasn't one of those shady, cheaper than a phone, haunted flats from horror movies. Nope, this place was fancy, over budget, and full of green views from both sides. But you know how Desi parents are. Once Ma set foot in that sunlit kitchen, it was game over. Logic, gone. Budget, goner. This was going to be our first owned home, even if it meant sacrificing a few kidneys emotionally. When we went to see it, it wasn't empty. The owners still lived there. A sweet retired teacher and her husband, a former bank manager. Their daughter lived nearby and had recently bought them a ground floor flat. There was no lift in the building, and with the lady's diabetes requiring frequent checkups and insulin visits, climbing 4 flights every day had become exhausting. Her husband's knees weren't helping either. Age was settling in, and this shift wasn't just about convenience, it was care. Their daughter did what most hoped their children would. She made space close to her so she could look after them properly. They were planning to shift, and lucky for us, they were selling this one. The couple had lived in that flat since their wedding. Over 30 years of memories packed into 4 walls. She was warm, talkative, always in bright suits with her black and white hair tied in a bun, offering us namkeen with a smile. They took 4 months to vacate even after selling it because emotions. But finally, we moved in, our first owned home. My parents lit up like Diwali diyas. They decorated every corner with love and chaos. I chose the best bedroom, obviously. It was the only one tucked away from the rest of the house, perfect for ignoring humans and embracing Wi-Fi. My Pinterest dreams came alive. Pink walls, indoor plants, a round bed, don't ask, a big mirror, and a desk for looking productive. It was vintage before. Now, it was me. 2024 was wholesome. First job celebrations, Masai Baba's anniversary, family dinners, and occasional drama. Because what's a happy family without screaming over AC remote rights? But this house felt lucky. And my room, it was my safe space. I'd stay in there all day until my mom banged the door yelling, "Fast car, come out and act like you have relatives." Then came February 2025. We got the news that the elder lady, the original owner, had passed away due to a heart attack. Baba went to her funeral. I was genuinely sad. Life went on. I still slept alone in my room, up late as usual, reading. That night was nothing new. AC humming, warm lights on, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros in hand. Half asleep, half fangirling over fictional men. Then I heard it, a soft creak, like a wardrobe door opening. I groaned, probably my messy pile of clothes staging a rebellion. I walked over, but to my shock, the wardrobe was neat, like magazine neat. I assumed Ma had done it, cursed my own laziness, and searched for my hidden stash. Gifts from my boyfriend, Polaroids, love letters that were more cringe than cute. All safe. I messed up a few shirts while checking and thought, future me can deal with this. I jumped back in bed and resumed reading. Just as I was dozing off, the wardrobe creaked again. This time I rolled over and muttered, "Clean yourself if you want. Good night," and knocked out. Next morning, I was late for work and almost forgot the wardrobe drama. Later in the day, I called Ma to say, "Please don't touch my cupboard. Okay? I'll clean it myself." Her reply, "I haven't touched your mess. I have board exam classes and zero motivation to enter your disaster zone." Okay, what? But whatever. If ghosts want to organize my wardrobe, I fully support them. Except, things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, my plants were always turned toward the sun. My scattered books, stacked, bookmarks perfectly placed. My mirror, spotless, like who's cleaning this? But the weirdest thing was the smell. Not of incense or anything creepy, just a faint scent of Dettol and rose talcum powder. Comforting, familiar. It hit me, it was her. The lady who'd lived in this home for over 30 years. That scent was hers. That old-school warm, clean vibe of Dettol and rose talc, like a memory quietly folded into the walls. Still, I wasn't scared. Felt safe, like someone was watching over me, not watching me. One night, during a power cut, I was at my desk, cranky and phoneless. The corridor light was off, but the moonlight came through the window just enough. And then I saw her, for a second, standing near my wardrobe, wearing a bright purple suit, dupatta pinned properly, silver earrings, her hair half black, half white, tied in a neat bun. She looked around the room gently, like she was checking if everything was okay. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that says, "Good, you're taking care of it." And she disappeared. The next morning at breakfast, Ma casually said, "Today's her turvy. Baba's gone to the bog." The 13th day, the last prayer, the farewell. That night I dreamt of her. She was sitting in my pink chair, watering the plant. She got up, walked to the window, looked at me, and smiled just like before. Then she was gone, for good. When I woke up, the room felt peaceful, still, like it had exhaled. Nothing's happened since. No creaks, no scent, no signs. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying with a book and the fan humming above me, I feel like the room remembers her, like it remembers both of us. Because maybe she never haunted the house. Maybe she just loved it too much to leave, until she knew it was loved again. I've always believed that true horror lives in silence, not in screams or blood, but in that exact moment when you realize something's wrong, and it's already too late to fix it. It started last September. I'd moved to a small town in western Kentucky for a clinical rotation. Housing was expensive, so I rented an old trailer parked in the backyard of a retired couple, Tom and Lori. The trailer sat near a tree line that bordered the forest. They told me someone used to live there full-time, but the last tenant had left suddenly. I didn't ask questions. All I needed was a bed, an outlet for my laptop, and some peace and quiet. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. The trailer creaked in the wind. The heater moaned like an old fridge, and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's dog barking at night. Nothing unusual. But then, just before 3 a.m. one night, I woke up to a sound. Not at the door on the side of the trailer. 3 soft knocks. Pause. Then again tap, tap, tap. I froze. My phone said 2:37 a.m. I lay there listening, heart pounding. After a minute, the knocking stopped. I told myself it was probably just a branch, maybe a raccoon, but the next night, it happened again. By the third night, I wasn't sleeping. Lights off, phone in hand. I waited. The knocking came again. 3 deliberate taps on the back wall. Not random, not wind, deliberate. It felt personal. Like someone wasn't saying, "I'm here." They were saying, "Aren't you scared yet?" Next morning, I checked the siding. No branches nearby. Back window, too high for any animal. And that feeling, it was growing. I casually asked Lori what happened to the last tenant. She looked away. Tom just muttered, "Oh, he didn't last long. Young guy, kept to himself. Kinda like you." That stuck with me. Soon I started noticing things. Smudged fingerprints on a window I never touched. A coffee mug moved slightly. Nothing big, just enough to make me doubt myself. I began recording short videos at night, not for proof, for sanity. Then one night, I woke to a whisper, but this time, it was coming from inside the trailer. From the bathroom, I grabbed my flashlight, slowly opened the door. Nothing, but on the mirror, written with a finger, were the words, "He's lying." That was enough. Next morning, I packed my things. Tom didn't ask why. He just nodded and said, "No one stays long." I moved a few hours away. New apartment, bright, normal. But the trailer, it stayed with me. The knocks, the mirror, the voice. After a few days, I needed answers. So I sent a letter to the local library. I gave them the trailer's address, the owner's names, and asked if they had any archived newspaper articles. A few days later, a librarian named Grace replied, "I've sent you a few articles, but I'd recommend not coming back here." Inside the envelope was a faded clipping. The headline read, "Local woman found dead behind rental trailer foul play suspected." Her name was Leah Grayson. She had lived in the trailer before me. The cause of death? Sleeping pill overdose. But the article said she never purchased any meds herself. And neighbors said she often spoke of voices, someone calling to her at night. But what chilled me most was a small note at the bottom of the page. Years prior, the owner's daughter, Alice Lori, was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and had lived in the same trailer. After a relapse, she was kept under home supervision. Further details undisclosed. Alice, she might have still been there, hiding, wandering, watching. Maybe she and Leah had met. Maybe things got out of hand. Tom and Lori, they stayed silent. Maybe they thought they were protecting her. Maybe they were just afraid. I watched one of my videos again. Late night, dark frame. At 2:36 a.m., the backyard gate creaks open. A figure enters, thin, wearing a long sweater. She stands there motionless, 2 full minutes, then turns and walks back into the trees. No ghosts, no demons, just someone forgotten, left untreated, wandering in the dark. Even knowing that, I still freeze whenever I hear 3 soft taps on the window. Tap, 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 because even now, I'm not sure it's just her. When I was 8, I found a diorama box. You may have seen one before or even made one for school or scouts or whatever. I had no clue what it was called at the time. Just a long, wooden box with a circular hole on each side and several small diamonds of frosted glass embedded across the top. I found it behind the abandoned Stonebrick Middle School, sitting like a gently placed present on a pile of broken pallets and old insulation. Even not knowing what it was, I could tell it was special. There was no way to open it, and its weight, its design, even the way the wood was carved, spoke of something out of the ordinary. And then I put my eye up to the box. Sunlight flowed and fractured from the opaque glass above, sending soft tendrils of luminescence curling up the walls and around the figures inside. I was seeing inside a house, probably the living room. The people were abstractions, just barely recognizable as people at all. and yet somehow I knew about them. That one was the mother, that one the daddy. There were a couple of kids, and on the arm of the couch, a gray lump that I thought was a cat. All of them seemed to be sitting together, watching a box that I figured was a television. I didn't get what the point of any of it was, but it was weird and fancy, so it felt like treasure to me. I took it home with some nervousness, afraid that my parents might think I stole it and take it away. When my dad noticed it that night, he asked where I'd found it. I knew enough to lie and say the woods instead of behind Stonebrick. Something bad had happened there when I was little, and even now I think most people avoid it. He considered me a moment and then picked it up, turning it over in his hands before putting his eye up to one of the holes. "Huh, that's a weird thing, isn't it? Guess it's game night." "Huh." Ruffling my hair, he handed it back. "Good find, sport. You'll be a pirate yet." I grinned with relief, but behind that was a growing sense of confusion. Game night? I waited until I was back in my bedroom, and then I turned on the bedside light and looked in the box again. It had changed. Instead of being in a living room, now they were gathered around what looked like a dining room table. Still a father and mother, and 2 kids. I could even see the cat sleeping on a sideboard against the far wall. And on the table, tiny but distinct, was a board game. I didn't tell anyone about the change, of course. They'd think I was pretending or lying at best. At worst, they'd believe me and take it away. Instead, I looked at it every day, sometimes for hours. I was smart enough to hide how obsessed I was with it, though sometimes it was hard. I didn't want to miss anything, after all. The scenes were always in the same house, but it would move from room to room, and the number of people and pets would change over time too. But I definitely felt like it was always the same people and house overall. Most of the time, for all the magic of the changes, the scenes themselves were pretty mundane. Just a family living their lives, doing the things they do. Tiny statutes devoid of features that somehow managed to always tell me exactly what was going on and how they felt about it. I remember when the son got into a fight in school, when the daughter had her first ballet lesson, the times the husband and wife fought, and the times they all came together to celebrate or comfort one another. When I was 16, I saw a change coming over the father. He wasn't sleeping much at all, and when he did, it was sitting up in a chair, away from his wife. They seemed to be fighting more. Everyone spent less time together, and within a few months, I started to worry they might split up. The scenes didn't change every day, so I had to wait until the weekend to see the latest developments. The father was holding the mother, and the children were hugged in around them too. I actually cried a little when I saw that. Whatever he'd been going through, I guess they'd gotten through it. Then 2 weeks later, he murdered them all. The night it happened, he was back on the sofa, a laptop in his lap. I could tell it was late at night, even with the light streaming in. The shadows thrown against the floor and walls looked like demons surrounding him. And as I watched, wanting and unable to comfort him, I saw something tiny appear beside him on the sofa. It was a knife. Despite all my untold hours of watching the thing, this is the only time I ever saw it change. The movement of the shifts hurt my brain to the point that I started pulling away after the second one, and not just because of what happened in the scenes. He goes to the son's room first and stabs him in the ear, bearing down on the blade with his weight. Then the daughter, he cuts her throat and belly open. The scene actually shifted twice there to make sure I saw him make both wounds. Then there was the wife. That scene shifted more slowly over the next 12 hours or so. When the final transition came, you couldn't tell she had ever been a person. Just bits of abstract someone, spread across the bed and floor and even the walls. After that, I never looked in the box again. I bought a safety deposit box where it has stayed ever since. You might think I should have destroyed it or thrown it away, but I couldn't quite manage it. Somehow I think I knew that, well, even though I was done with it, it wasn't done with me. That became very clear a few weeks ago. I haven't been myself. Terrible dreams and worse thoughts. I don't sleep. I fly off the handle at the smallest thing. Once I realized that I recognized what I was doing, it only made it that much worse. The past few days I've really tried to do better, but I can feel it isn't going to last. I have to do something. My plan had been to write this all down, read back through it, and if it didn't seem totally insane, give it to my wife in the morning. It might not make sense to her, but at least she would know what was on my mind. Except just now, I've seen it next to me. The knife. I've never seen it before. Well, not up close and not for a very long time. I tell myself I have to get rid of it, get it away from me, away from my family, but I can't quite do that either. Maybe it's because it's not really my choice, or because it's what I really want, or maybe it's because of what I just saw, because I did get up just now for a minute and try to throw it away, even if it was just into the yard, so long as it wasn't in sight or arm's reach. I opened the front door and was rearing back to throw the knife away when I saw it, hovering among the murky nighttime shadows of the tree-line. It was an eye, monstrously gigantic. It looked this way and that, both terrifying and terrifyingly familiar, because I knew that didn't I? Knew the monster it belonged to well. It was me. Rumor has it that on the 4th floor of that abandoned apartment was hidden a candlelight store where anyone could make a modification of their own life. The apartment complex had a tall gate and was padlocked. Despite the intriguing rumor, only a handful of people dared to jump inside. Not just because of the padlock, but also because there was no electricity, no light. It was dark, full of ruins, and dangerous to explore. There was one guy who came out and told a story about how he saved his dying daughter by moving her flame onto his candle so they could share the same lifespan. Yes, a candle. The place was full of candles, each lit with its own flame. The candles represented lives. A short candle meant a short life. Brandon, Irina, and I summoned our courage and entered the abandoned apartment. That night, we stood on the 4th floor, right in front of a hallway blocked by another padlocked gate. To get past it, we had to crawl along the outer edge of the balcony. The store in question was the 4th room beyond the gate. There was no door and it was pretty dark inside, but we could see because countless flames lit up the space. Candles, so many of them. Welcome. A man greeted us. He wore a white suit, dark trousers, and a red tie. He looked like an ordinary office worker. There was another guest, I muttered. Where's the shopkeeper? I heard he guarded this room. I am the shopkeeper, he said, smiling an eerie smile. Oh, I didn't expect you to look like that, Brandon responded. I hear that a lot, he replied. What can I help you with? Rumor said this place allows us to modify life, Irina said. It's not a rumor, the man replied. What do you need? Brandon and Irina exchanged glances. They came out of curiosity. They didn't really have a plan, but I did. So, all of these candles represent the lives of people? I asked. In this city, yes, he explained. Every city has a place like this, where lives are stored in the form of candles. Interesting, I commented. Which candle is mine? It doesn't work that way, sir, the shopkeeper said. If you want to modify your life candle, you'll have to find out for yourself which one is yours. I'm just here to tell you the rules, what you can and can't do, he added. Fine, I thought. I wandered through the room, which at first seemed small but revealed itself to be endlessly large. At one point, I walked past a candle that, for some reason, caught my attention. It stood about 15 centimeters tall. No name, no label, but somehow I just knew it was mine. How many years would this candle last? I asked. The shopkeeper didn't flinch, just smiled that same eerie smile. Sure, I thought. I picked up the candle and walked around until I found the biggest, tallest candle I had ever seen. It stood on the floor, almost as tall as me and as thick as my torso. I can't ask who this candle belongs to, can I? I asked the shopkeeper. Brandon and Irina followed behind me. Once again, the same eerie smile. Can I slice the tip of this small candle and put it on top of that big one? Yes, he finally answered. But that big candle is special. You can't put two flames on it. You'd have to swap them. You can place the small one on top first, but you must immediately move the other flame. I took out a camping knife from my bag and carefully sliced the tip, swapping the flames. Do you want help finding yours? I proudly asked Brandon and Irina. No, thanks. This place terrifies me, Brandon said. Same, Irina added, and just like that, we left the room. Strangely, the shopkeeper's eerie smile was gone. It had turned into a happy smile, one he seemed to try hard to hide. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. I swapped my life flame with a bigger candle. I didn't think anything would happen, except that I'd live longer. But then something strange started. I slowly forgot events that had happened my entire life. It started with my childhood memories, then expanded to life events that happened as I got older. After a few weeks, I started forgetting people's names, even my own family's. I couldn't even remember the names of my 2 friends who had gone with me to the candlelight store. I couldn't remember their names, so I couldn't figure out where I had saved them in my phone to try calling. Then one day, I accidentally saw them on the street, and something even stranger happened. They didn't recognize me. Days passed, and my body started to feel off. I felt weak and constantly out of breath. The only thing I remembered was the strange candlelight store on the 4th floor. So I went. With shallow breaths, I finally reached the store on the 4th. Is anyone here? I shouted as I stepped inside. Well, there you are, said the same shopkeeper, now greeting me with a wide, bright smile. I've been waiting for you, I gasped. What do you mean? I can finally go home now, he said. I thought you lived here, I muttered. Then, frantically, I continued, No, listen. Something strange is happening to me. I've lost all the memories of my life. I can't remember anything. I've forgotten everyone's name. I feel like I'm dying. What's happening to me? Yeah, that happened to me too, he replied. Excuse me? The biggest candle you saw in this store, he began, belonged to the shopkeeper. It was yours, I shouted. The shopkeeper's, he repeated. I was once a visitor like you, and funny enough, I did what you did. I swapped my candle with the big one. It gave me centuries of life, but... He paused. I was cursed to live in this store, guarding it as the shopkeeper. I froze. As long as my flame stayed on the big candle, I couldn't leave the store, he continued. If I stepped outside, I'd be choked to death. But can't you just... I stuttered. No, I can't, he cut in quickly. Once I reached the point where I couldn't remember anything except this store, I became the shopkeeper. And as the shopkeeper, I couldn't physically interact with both the visitors and the candles. So, you just waited for someone to make the same choice, I muttered. Actually, it doesn't have to be a swap, he said, laughing for the first time. Anyone can place 2 flames on that big candle, or more. That just means there would be 2 shopkeepers, but I don't want to be one. So, swapping it meant you'd take on the shopkeeper's life, and I'd take yours. Realizing what he meant, rage surged through me. I instinctively grabbed my camping knife and lunged, but I couldn't move. It felt like invisible hands held me back. I told you, didn't I? He smirked, walking joyously toward the store's exit. I don't even remember how long I've been here, he said, face gleaming with joy. Years, maybe decades. It feels good to be back in life. He turned to look at me, now unable to leave the store, smiled one last time and spoke his final words. Thank you for the life. Goodbye. She's in the walls, he said. I paused, not ready to jump to any conclusions. I've had clients say the craziest things, only for it to turn out to be something mundane, misunderstood. You think I'm having difficulty telling reality apart from fantasy? He continued, a tinge of spite in his tone. I blinked. Then I remembered. In one of our past sessions, he had shared some pretty implausible tales. like how he was a master of black magic. He had talked about the hexes he had successfully cast in the past. I had gently probed his narrative, wanting to see how real his belief was to him. He must have realized I had doubted his grasp of reality. "I'm just curious. What do you mean by she's in the walls?" I asked, keeping my expression pleasant, calm. He could still be talking about something perfectly normal, like a rat, a lizard. "After I killed her, I placed her body behind the walls and bricked them up again." Okay, he wasn't leaving much room for doubt. "Are you saying that you killed the woman you've been having nightmares about?" As I spoke, I flicked open up the web WhatsApp window on my screen and typed a quick text to the clinic manager. "Potentially dangerous client. Stand by for emergency protocols." He nodded. "The bad dream started a day after I killed her and sealed her behind the walls." He proceeded to tell me what he had been unwilling to tell me in our session last week. He told me how he had felt something strange stir within him when he had first caught sight of this woman. She worked near him. It wasn't love. It was a fascinated contempt, a horrified disgust. He couldn't take his mind off her and followed her. Everywhere. He figured out her schedule, who she would meet, places she would go. He finally got her alone one day, down a route she occasionally took while going for her early morning runs. He didn't have any brilliant plan in mind, and so he just struck her in the back of the head as she ran by, with a rock he kept in his pocket. She had fallen. He had simply scooped her up and carried her to his car parked nearby. No one was around to witness it in the wee hours of the morning. Still hoping for some normalcy, I tried to formulate what this could really be about. Maybe he needed attention. Maybe he liked to shock and awe others with outlandish tales. Carrying an unconscious woman to his car? That couldn't be as easy as he made it out to be. Maybe he wanted to test me, see how I would react to a wild tale of murder, right? "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because of the nightmares. They wouldn't stop. I tried not to tell you about it, to just work through the nightmares without context. But I realize I need you to know, so you can give me proper help." There was a dead, earnest look in his eyes. Suddenly, I believed him. I could no longer try to poke holes in his story. This man meant every word he said. "Call the police. Tell them a client just confessed to murder. Might be dangerous right now. Get them down here." I typed on the WhatsApp chat, pretending to be taking notes. I had to break confidentiality at that point. It was legal protocol. "The nightmares, yes. Tell me more about them. You said they were vivid, that you would wake up screaming. What did you dream about?" I asked, hoping to stall him until the police came. I was honestly also a little curious. He hadn't been willing to tell me the contents of his nightmares last week. Just her face, right in front of mine. She would start off looking terrified, the way she looked when I slit her throat. Then she would grin, a wicked grin. She was a wicked, evil woman. I fought the urge to raise an eyebrow. "She was a wicked woman. That was your sense in the dream?" I gave myself a pat on the back for keeping my tone clear of the disbelief and contempt I felt. He slit her throat, but she was evil? Holy shit. She was always evil. I knew that, so I did what I needed to do, what the world needed me to do. He smiled brightly at me and winked. My stomach churned. It was a knowing wink, like we had some shared secret. I kept quiet and he went on with his tale. He told me about 5 minutes worth of the story before the police came. He said he knew she was evil from the dark aura he could see. He stalked her to make sure and saw the horrible things she did to others. She was condescending, manipulative, rude, and a bully. He spat the word bully like it singed his lips to say it. Despite myself, I noted his reaction down in my clinical notes. Flinched at the word bully. Has been bullied. He got rid of her, hid her body in the walls of some deserted building. He told me the building name. I knew it. I lived near it. I had watched dozens of stores open and shut down within months at that place. No one knew why business was so bad there. The location wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. But it was infamous for being bad luck for shop owners. It was in the process of being sold to a new owner for redevelopment. "But I hear her now," he said, fear flickering in his eyes. "When I lie awake late at night, she scratches at my walls. I know she's not in there. I know where she lies. But the scratching, it wouldn't stop." The door opened then, and 2 police officers stepped in. I was relieved that they had the sense not to sound the sirens or kick up a fuss before entering the room. I had been worried that my client would be triggered once alerted to the police's arrival. I didn't want him to hold me hostage or something. They cuffed him and took him away. He turned to face me right before they let him out the door. There was a look of calm and satisfaction on his face, like he had expected me to call the police, like he knew what would happen, and as if he wasn't afraid of the consequences. Once again, he smiled. My insides curled. I headed down to the police station and gave them all the details my client had told me about the murder. Once I got home, I took a shower and downed some wine. It was a wild day. I was ready to put it behind me and get back to normal. I slept fitfully. There were flitting images of my client in my dreams. His look of satisfaction, his knowing wink. There was also a persistent scratching sound that I couldn't locate. The next day, awake but in a fog, I was called back to the station. "How did you know Anita?" Not the real name was the first question I was asked. My brows furrowed. I knew only one Anita. Why were they asking about my crazy ex-boss? "She was my employer for a short while," I responded. "I worked for her a few years back, for less than a year." "Did you part on bad terms?" I bit my lip. Why was the investigator asking about this out of the blue? There was a sinking sensation in my gut. Yes, she was difficult to work for. When I quit, she blew her top, threatened me. "Why are you asking about her?" I had a terrible feeling I knew the answer. "Did you kill Anita?" My mouth went dry. I stared at him in disbelief, but his face was an impassive mask. "No, no." "Shit, the woman in the walls. Then how did you know the location of her body?" I gaped at him. "The woman he killed. It was Anita, wasn't it?" "He's saying he has no idea what you're talking about, that you hypnotized him last session, did something to his mind. He's been having nightmares ever since." "The fuck?" I stared at the officer, mouth open. "Hey, right now it's he said, you said. We're just trying to figure things out. But I've got to say, that man has no connection to Anita at all. No one spotted him near her, not even a text, a phone call, nothing. You, on the other hand," he sighed, "you worked for her. You were open about your dislike for her. We saw some of your posts on social media. Subtle, vague, but quite clearly targeted at her." "Posts? Social media?" I hated Anita, sure, but posting about her? I didn't have that kind of guts. She was a terrifying, cunning bitch. She had considerable influence in our industry. She could make life pretty tough for me, as she had made it for many others. I had no wish to invite further backlash. The officer pulled out his phone, tapped on it for a bit, then showed it to me. Posts from a social media account with my name on it, even my face. But it wasn't my account. I told the officer so. "This account has been active for the past 2 years, he said. "For 2 years, it has been posting intermittently under your identity, and you've never been informed or aware about it." I grabbed his phone again and looked at the account more closely. It has 43 followers. Come on. And I bet none of them are my friends. How could I have found out about it? It's not like I obsessively Google my name or something. The officer took his phone back. He remained expressionless. The next 2 hours of interrogation were brutal. I told him in minute detail all that I could remember about my employment under Anita, the fallout, the following months of insults, and her attempts to blackball me. How her attempts failed, because by then, many in the industry knew her reputation. I even admitted to going for therapy sessions to deal with the trauma from it all. He said he might subpoena my therapist for clinical notes, but whatever. I didn't say anything crazy during those therapy sessions. I couldn't exactly be completely open and honest in sessions with fellow therapists, after all. We might still one day cross paths in our work. My could-have-been alibi, the doorbell camera, just so happened to be disconnected on the night she was murdered. I hadn't even noticed. I only checked the footage whenever something cropped up. Like this investigation. I had gone to the park nearby for a walk that night when I was supposedly murdering Anita. I told the police, and they went around the neighborhood, looking for surveillance footage from shops, car dash cams, and witnesses who may have seen me. But there was nothing. By then, it was abundantly clear. I was being set up. Somehow, that client had been planning to murder Anita for years. He had been setting me up for years. It all looked bad for me. My history with Anita, my knowledge of exactly where she was hidden, how she died, the social media posts which somehow had its IP tied into my Wi-Fi. I cursed myself for having a predictable Wi-Fi password. The client claimed that he had never spoken about Anita or any murder, that he had recently come back for help with nightmares related to a past memory he hadn't told me about, that I had hypnotized him. It was EMDR. I just let him access the memory related to the nightmares without telling me what it was, and did EMDR with him, letting his eyes follow my fingers as he accessed the traumatic memories. It was far from hypnosis. It was a legit tool to help with traumatic experiences. It was bilateral stimulation. It was nothing like hypnosis. The asshole had twisted everything. He told the police I made his nightmares worse, and that he didn't know what happened during our most recent session. Said he had been dazed by my hypnosis when the police came. It's incredible how easily someone can destroy your life, if they choose to. 1 minute, I had my life together, more or less. Next, I was under suspicion of murder. I originally thought being innocent would clear my name quickly, but turns out that's not how the legal system works. Things only got worse. The night I got home after the interrogation, I downed a bottle of wine. Then I lay in bed, trying to sleep, to get some respite from the nightmare that my life was morphing into. A scraping sound roused me to full alertness. Another scraping sound. It was like something scratching. There was something scratching behind my walls. My heart skipped a bit, and my breath caught in my throat. Hesitantly, gingerly, I pressed my ear to the wall. The scratching was loud, like nails on drywall. It felt like something was scratching a centimeter from my ear. I jerked away from the wall and sank back down on my bed, my limbs weak. There was another sound. Was it a whisper? Couldn't tell. It was faint, covered by the scratching sounds. I was imagining things, I told myself. The investigation was fraying my nerves. The wine had muddled my sanity. I thought of fleeing to a hotel for the night, but the police had told me to stay where I was. I didn't want to look like I was running away. I got back into bed and shut my eyes. I was imagining things, I repeatedly told myself. The scratching continued. There was no way I could sleep. An agonizing few minutes later, a soft humming started up. It rose in volume until it resembled static, or the type of sound a white noise machine might produce. The static began to overwhelm even the sounds of scratching. I tried to sit up then to get out of the house, consequences be damned. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Couldn't even open my eyes. I struggled desperately, straining with every fiber of my being, screaming silently to the point where I thought my lungs would burst. But I couldn't move a single muscle, couldn't make the slightest sound. Then I dreamt, or I think I did. I saw her behind my closed lids. Anita knelt before me, begging for her life. An arm reached out. I grabbed Anita by her arm and hit her in the side of her already bleeding head with a rock. She collapsed to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. I stood over her, grinning. A knife glinted. A knife that I held, I realized. I knelt down and placed the knife against Anita's throat. Couldn't stop it. Couldn't will my hand to stop. Couldn't wipe the grin from my face. Something rushed me from the side. I toppled over. "You killed me!" Someone was screeching. I looked around frantically. A dark energy, like a swirling cloud. A flash of a maniacal smile from something within. "You killed me, and you'll pay." The dark mass swept towards me. I screamed, fended whatever it was off with my arms. Silence. I looked around. Nothing was around me. No dark cloud. But Anita was there. A pool of blood spreading beneath her neck. I looked down. The knife in my hand was covered with blood. I woke up screaming. My shirt was soaked with perspiration. The police came for me a few hours after that. They told me they had found my prints. On her arm. Right where I had seen myself grab her in the dream. I can't explain it anymore. I know for a fact, I know with all my being that I didn't do it. I didn't snap, split from reality, nothing. I remember the night she died. I was home. I got bored and went for a walk in the park. I went home after my 45 minutes of brisk walking was up. I was trying to keep fit. But the dreams, the posts, the scratching in my walls. He had set me up, sure. But how could he have accessed my bedroom walls? My dreams? They arrested me. I was held for weeks before a judge finally granted me bail. I was to be on house arrest until my case was tried. No flight risk, a stable career, good community relations, no priors. I was lucky to get bail, they said. I didn't feel lucky at all. I got one text from that client in all this time. "Do you know what's real?" I had stared, confused, for a moment, before I flung the phone onto the sofa in anger. Was that what this was all about? Was he doing this to me because I had made some comments that suggested he might have broken from reality? Did he seek sessions with me just to set me up? Did he ever even need therapy? I retrieved my phone within a minute, once I realized I could screenshot the text as evidence. But the text was gone, evaporated into thin air. Maybe I really don't know what's real. Maybe I am losing my mind. I'm stuck at home for the next 2 months. Maybe longer if there are delays in getting the case to court. My life is over. My reputation is in tatters. And still, every night, the scratching goes on. The nightmares keep coming. I wake screaming every night. Anita's face, contorted sometimes in rage, sometimes in agony. My client's grin. The dreams are so vivid they are starting to feel like memories. Maybe I should just give in. Say I did it. Plead guilty. Hope for the death sentence. Because I can't live like this anymore. It was already dark outside. For 2 hours, the only sound was the relentless ticking of the big clock on the wall. They'd trapped me again. Honestly, it almost felt like my own fault. Same trick as always. Wait until I went to the bathroom, tossed my stuff into an empty classroom after our last period, and locked the door as soon as I stepped in to grab it. It was the perfect way to farm laughs, and Seth and his friends were good at it. The whole class walked by laughing as loud as they could. Usually a teacher would notice pretty fast and come let me out, giving the kids a mild scolding. This time, no one came, so I waited, tried shouting for someone, gave up and sat there, trying not to cry. I didn't want to give them that satisfaction. Crouched in the corner, I kept wondering when the night janitor would finally spot me. That's when I saw it. A shape moving in the dark, low to the ground, beneath the chairs. At first it was just a blur. Then it grew clearer. Long limbs and thin frame, blue skin and huge black eyes. I didn't panic or flinch because I knew that silhouette. "Terry?" I asked. He walked funny like he always did, like his knees were put together wrong. Wobbly, tilted, arms swinging a bit too far like he was trying to act human but couldn't quite pull it off. He crouched beside me, watching me the same way he did when I was 8 and scraped my leg on the pavement. Back then, Mom called him my imaginary friend. "He's just in your head," she'd say, smiling like it was sweet. But she never looked too closely at the drawings I made of him. He wasn't really a friend. And to me, though, he always felt real. He even cast a shadow. Terry leaned in, his mouth just inches from my ear. Then, in a low, raspy voice, broken by erratic laughter, he whispered, "Let me kill them." Good thing Ms. Mayworth hadn't left the school yet. She passed by and unlocked the door a few minutes later, and got really angry when she saw me sitting there alone in the dark. She asked me who did it, but I didn't give her any names. Just looked down and followed her out in silence. I walked back to my house hoping no one would see me, but of course they were there, Seth and his pack, waiting near my street like wolves that couldn't let the kill go. Soon as they saw me, they lost it, bursting out laughing, stumbling over each other like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. "Jesus, look at his face," one of them shouted. I bet he cried so much. I didn't say a word, just kept walking past them and into my house. Mom was too lost in whatever pill she was on to notice me, so I went straight to bed. But it took me a while to fall asleep. I kept thinking about Terry's face, his words. The next morning, I tried to keep my distance from Seth and the others, skipped lunch altogether. Instead, I found a quiet spot out in the gardens at school, under one of the big trees, and started reading. I didn't think anyone would bother me, but then I saw Ms. Mayworth. She walked straight over, holding an apple. "You shouldn't skip meals," she said, crouching a little so we were eye level. I just nodded, took the apple, and mumbled a quiet thanks. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, Elide." She kept at it, gently trying to get me to talk about what happened. But I didn't. Then she glanced at the book on my lap. The Flowers of Evil by Baudelaire. "Pretty advanced for your age," she said. I looked away. "I like poetry," I admitted, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. With a smile, she told, "Same here. See you in class," and headed off toward the school. Not long after, I heard Terry's voice coming out of the branches above me. I looked up, and there he was, arms looped over like a monkey, his long blue fingers gripping the wood. He was laughing, loud, erratic. Then the whisper came back, now sharper, over and over. "Let me kill them. Let me kill them. Let me kill them." It crawled under my skin, made my hands shake. I couldn't take it, so I got up and left. As I walked off, I heard him shout behind me, his voice almost desperate, "You have to let me kill them." It was late afternoon, last period, Ms. Mayworth's English class. I asked to go to the bathroom. She nodded, barely looking up from the book she was lecturing us from. But when I got back, everything felt off. The class was still going. She was reading aloud, but there were muffled laughs across the room, smiles being bitten down and heads turning slightly toward me, then away. I stopped near the door for a second before walking quietly back to my seat. Something felt wrong, so I checked my desk, then my backpack. That's when I noticed my notebook was gone, the one I kept very well hidden. My hands started shaking as I rifled through every pocket, every book, but it was gone. Then a kid next to me leaned in with a smirk and slid a paper toward my hand. I looked down. It was one of my poems, ripped straight from my notebook. I looked around. Slowly, horribly, I saw more. Plenty of pages passed around like trading cards. Some read them aloud in hushed, mocking voices, while Ms. Mayworth called for attention, trying to understand what was going on. A few tried to stifle laughter, and some didn't even try. I looked across the room and saw him, Seth. He was sitting there like a king, holding my notebook, now half empty, like it was a trophy, looking right at me with that smug, dead-eyed smile. Something broke in me at that moment, and I stood up so fast I knocked my chair over. Ms. Mayworth paused her reading. I didn't even hear what I shouted, because my vision blurred red. My throat was raw. It felt like something else had taken control of my mouth, something deeper than rage. The class burst into more laughter, not at the poems anymore, at me. Seth leaned back in his chair, relaxed. enjoying the sight of my tears. Ms. Mayworth quickly walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Outside," she said, gently but firmly. "Let's go." And I followed, eyes down, face burning. She closed the door behind us. We stood in the hallway as I kept staring at the floor, ashamed. "Are you okay?" she asked. I didn't respond, and we kept silent for a few seconds. Then I heard it, Terry's voice. "Can I kill them now?" His voice was right there, facing me. I looked up and froze. Ms. Mayworth stood there, but her eyes became huge, black, endless. Her fingers had stretched, long and blue, and she smiled like Terry. She asked me again, softly, "Can I?" My throat tightened. I wanted to say no. I knew it wasn't right. I knew they didn't deserve it, but all I did was nod a shy yes. Her smile widened. Without saying a word, she turned around, opened the door, walked calmly back into the classroom, and shut the door again. I heard a lock. I stayed in the hall. Seconds later, I heard the gasps, then screams, desk scraping, chaos. A splash of red painted the tiny window in the door. The crying was so loud I can still hear it now, almost as loud as Terry's laugh. And I didn't move an inch. I just stood there, numb. There's a level of anxiety that comes with starting a new job that I just hate. Not sure if it's just the process of learning what to do, the pressure of proving myself to new coworkers, or just the stress of being in a new environment, but it's been a constant across every job I've ever taken. This newest one piled that anxiety onto the max though, and I don't think I'll be going back after what happened last night. To be perfectly clear, if I end up hitting send on this and you're reading it right now, well, it's not really up to me if I go back to work or not. They're probably going to ship me off to some black site that's further off the map than my current position. 1 week here and I've learned all those conspiracy theories Americans have about Area 51 barely begin to scratch the surface, so might as well go for broke and tell the whole story, right? I've been in the Air Force for about 5 years now, and this was supposed to be my latest post. Something my commanding officer said was a breeze, which I honestly had doubts about considering I've been in Germany for the last 2 years, and it was, for lack of a better description, the easiest shit I've ever done. They said it would be just as easy, except I would get to be back on home turf in the desert of Nevada. Guard duty isn't that hard anyway, right? Assuming you're guarding humans, my first day started out like any other I've had. Get to the base, find the CO there, and get my orders directly from them. They assigned me to this older officer as my trainer, Mills, and he started leading me through the main building towards our post. According to him, all we had to do was keep an eye on the security cams for the entire place and notify higher-ups if anything looked out of place. The base itself was, well, what you expect from a base in the middle of the desert. A few big, nondescript buildings surrounded by fences with a healthy amount of razor wire. I honestly wasn't expecting much when I got in, but imagine my surprise when Mills told me to hop into a golf cart so we could get to the monitor room. I mean, I always figured there was more to Area 51 than what we could see from the outside, but then we drove at least 4 miles through this huge tunnel on a pretty steep incline. He was talking to me the whole time, asking me if I had found a place to live nearby yet and telling me about staying away from the Vegas Strip on my off days. Seemed like we were driving for hours through a long concrete tunnel, my stomach getting more and more uneasy with every passing foot, when we finally stopped in front of a small door built into the side of the tunnel. "You're lucky, kid. This has to be the cushiest job in the entire US military. We just watch these screens and give a little check-in every other hour. Sometimes they'll have us do rounds and check doors. Otherwise, I get to sit here and work on my Sudoku puzzles for as long as I want while getting top dollar for it," he said to me when we entered. The room was surprisingly big, with almost the 2 entire walls filled floor to ceiling with monitors that we were supposed to keep track of. Some showed empty, gray rooms with nothing but abandoned desks. Others were static shots of desert sand. Another with the exterior of the buildings we entered through. Then one in the upper right corner caught my eye. "What in the world is that?" I asked, pointing to the screen in question. Mills gave a chuckle, pulling up a chair at the small desk and grabbing the nearby mouse. With a few clicks, he enlarged the image for me to see better. In the middle of a small, all-white room sat a table. On that table was one small body, and at first I honestly thought it was a child. Maybe the kid of a superior officer having a nap or something while their dad was working, I don't fucking know. Then when Mills made the picture bigger, I noticed the odd proportions of it. A massive head, long arms and legs with a small torso that seemed barely strong enough to hold up the rest of it. The gray, flushed skin was nearly a pale white that looked sickly against the walls of the room. "You're fucking with me, right?" I asked, looking back at Mills. He smiled, shaking his head and putting the screen back on multiview. "Nope. Welcome to orientation day, kid. That there is an original," he said, taking a seat and pulling out a massive thermos before beginning to pour the contents into a mug. "What did they tell you when you were assigned here?" "Nothing, pretty much," I said, mind swirling. There was no way he just confirmed the existence of aliens so casually. It was like showing me an animal in a zoo exhibit for him. All he was doing was smiling, watching as I tried to reconcile what I was seeing on the screen. Scanning through different views from the cameras, I began to notice even more odd sights. A massive disc in one that had tons of tech set up all around it. A mechanic using an arc welder on one side. Another view showed something in another room. It looked like a concentrated ball of darkness, the occasional tendril reaching outward towards the door before a light would come on, causing it to snap back into place. Then another room with one lone person sitting in a chair, dressed like your everyday civilian with just a shit-eating grin on his face. All of it looked so out of place to the regular human, but Mills was smiling at me like it was just another day. "So what is all this?" "Well, what have you heard about Roswell 1947? He shot back at me. I shrugged as he continued. "Doppelgangers, dark matter, all kinds of weird shit out there that the regular Joe doesn't get to know about. Come on, want some coffee? So you mean all the little green men cartoons and shit like that? All real? Like not even an exaggeration or change to how they look?" I sat next to him, taking the mug of coffee he offered and sipping slow. It burned a little, but that burn was helping to distract me from the near-existential crisis going on in my head at the moment. "Best way to hide something is to do it in plain sight," he retorted. "And they're not green, as you can see. More of a gray pallor, though they look a lot like a corpse in most lighting. That one there is perfectly healthy though, far as we can tell." "How can you tell?" "It looks dead." "Well, we don't have anything that can pierce its skin, and of course vitals aren't going to be the same as what we measure for ourselves, but they have picked up brain waves, from as far as 60 feet away even. That's why that room has lead walls 3 feet thick. Damn thing will start talking into your brain if you're close enough." He muttered, his face flickering for a moment from being playful to a look of horror. "Telepathy?" I asked. He only nods. "Some Professor X shit if I've ever seen it. Went through it myself on one of my first guard duties here. They didn't have the walls thick enough yet, and when I passed by on rounds it started screaming in my head. I nearly choked on the hot coffee, earning myself a coughing fit in the process. What did it say? Begged me to let it go. Then when it realized I couldn't do that, it started begging me to kill it. It hasn't moved from that table in the almost 80 years it's been here, so they think it's paralyzed or something, totally unable to move. Probably happened in the crash. Was like it was reading my mind though, because I barely got the thought out and it was screaming curses at me for letting it live. Hell, like I have a choice. Uncle Sam would have me erased from existence if I did that." He looked around the monitors. "Can't say I blame it for asking though. Must be a hell of an existence just stuck there like that. I just couldn't compute what was happening. Somewhere in my brain was a voice going, well, of course aliens exist, while a whole other section was telling me this makes everything I've ever known a total lie. Why the hell did I get chosen for this post? I'm nothing remarkable. I haven't done anything bad to piss off superiors, so why would they put me here and shatter my entire worldview? Did someone really just hate me? Or was I just another faceless rank that they tossed on the job? Just don't let it get to you too bad. All right? Mills said, genuine concern on his face now. I know it's a lot to take in, but trust me, it's normal after a while. Just don't think too hard on any of it. The rest of the day was spent watching monitors and doing rounds. Between our patrols, Mills clued me in on the guests that were kept around here. The gray was obviously the big deal, but the other things on the screen were a whole other ballgame of weird. The disc thing was the ship the gray arrived in. Not too big of a surprise there. Mills said they haven't been able to crack the damn thing since the crash though. There's no door in, no visible way out, and nothing we have can get through the hull, though the guy with the arc welder gave it his best for about 3 hours before finally calling it quits. Dark matter was what he called the mass of darkness in the lighted room. Said he wasn't sure where the hell they found it, but anything that went into the dark never came out. There were at least 10 high-powered UV lamps in that room that acted as a deterrent, and apparently it could assimilate any sort of shadow or darkness, potentially using it to escape. By far the creepiest one, though, was the doppelganger. Mills mentioned to me that it had breached containment once before, able to nearly perfectly imitate any human it wants. About brought the entire damn place down and killed 5 guards before they got it back into a cell. It just sat there, totally rigid, upright, smiling huge with pointed, inhuman teeth that gave away it wasn't one of us. Damn thing gave me a shiver every time the rotating cameras passed back over it. I went home that night unable to sleep. I know it seems cliche, but finding out we aren't alone in this universe is fucking terrifying. Like ruin your entire worldview level shit. I was raised Baptist, and even though I didn't hold to it, I started to question if God was even real. And if he was, why the hell would he make anything like what was being kept in Area 51? That was 4 days ago. The next 2 days were uneventful for the most part. Some dumbass conspiracy theorists were trying to climb one of the fences near the upper base, but here underground in lower base, nobody knew we were there. Mills about drove me out of my mind with small talk. The guy is nice and everything, but when you're looking at aliens and deadly mimics on security cameras, it seems kind of trivial to discuss your favorite food or what was on television the night before. Last night, everything went straight to hell. I got in for my first solo guard duty. Guess 3 days of training was expected to be enough time to acclimate myself to the horrors of the universe Uncle Sam was hiding deep below the Nevada desert. Wish I had called out, if we're being honest. Around 9:30, not long after the last rays of sunlight had finally faded over the horizon, I went on my first patrol of the night, through the long tunnel down to the cells area. A long hallway, each holding cell about 30 feet apart, with most of that space filled with solid concrete between rooms. There were other guards on duty, of course. Each cell had 2 men posted outside, ready in case anything might make a break for it. From the cells, it was back upstairs to upper base and R&D, where they were trying to crack the disc once again, this time with a massive laser setup that looked like it could do some gnarly damage if it was aimed elsewhere. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. When I got back to the monitor room, it was around 10:30. Going through the cameras, nothing was really out of the ordinary. The dark matter had the UV lights all the way up, a normal precaution during the night hours. Why, when we were over 100 feet below ground, is beyond my pay grade. Not like sunlight is reaching down here to help during the day. The doppelganger was sitting, staring into the corner. I didn't stay on the camera for it too long because it made me shiver involuntarily. It was like no matter if it was facing you or not, it could always see you. I swear it was watching me more than I was watching it, and there was no fucking way it could see me. Eventually, I hit the outer cameras. These things were all over the surface, disguised as cactuses, shrubbery, random rocks. Whatever could hide a camera had one in it, covering every possible inch of the surface above the real base. It was camera 46 that stood out tonight, though. I don't know if I would have noticed it if it weren't a clear night. Every damn star in the sky was visible through the cams, shining bright to show the entire desert, except right up in the top left side of the camera's view. There, the stars were blinking and moving ever so slightly, wavering from side to side like something was swinging them around for its own amusement. As I stared, it began to affect more of the stars nearby, nearly engulfing everything in view before finally settling in. As I looked closer, reaching for my radio to call one of the surface guards, something flashed. Every camera went out along with the lights. The base shut down completely for a moment, darkness taking over as whatever flashed outside cut off the electricity. Before I could even reach for a flashlight, it was back on though. My face was mirrored on the black screen, a look of fear in my eyes. I booted everything back up, looking close as it took its sweet time, desperate to bring Cam 46 back up so I could see what the hell was going on. My worried expression stared back at me as alarms began going off across the base. Attention, lockdown protocols are now active. Please stay at your post and report any strange occurrences. Lockdown protocols are now active. Do not, under any circumstances, open cell doors. The screen came back on, but it wasn't on Cam 46. Instead, there was my own face, still staring back at me, but this time in full HD color. Rows of sharp teeth in a huge grin smiling right at me. Nearly fell back out of my chair when I realized the doppelganger was staring straight into the camera, taunting me. I don't know how the hell it took my face, whether it could just sense me there through the camera or it just did it randomly, but it freaked me the fuck out. Wash, what the hell are you doing in there? The radio started cackling. I could barely hear it through my own racing heartbeat. One of the superior officers on the base calling for me to check in. Meanwhile, the doppelganger was still just staring at me over the screen, daring me to make some kind of move or come after it. My hands shaking, reaching for the radio, I pushed the button down to talk back. Yes, sir, I'm here. My voice sounded distant, frail. The smile on the doppelganger seemed to get bigger as my fear grew. Well, what the hell happened out there? Did you see anything on the surveillance? He shot back. There was something in the sky, like it was shimmering. Then a flash and everything went out. I stammered back. Son of a bitch, they're back. He was shouting now. Who's back? Good God, you would think if there was some history of attacks on this place, they would have clued me in so I could keep an eye out. Graze, he replied. That was when a huge explosion sent a tremor through the building. Switching through the cameras back to the one above ground, I could see that the sky wasn't empty anymore. There were at least 3 discs, just like the one being kept down here in R&D, hovering in the sky. One fired off a thin beam of light towards the ground, causing another tremor to rock the base. Lights flickered, but didn't quite go out this time. I need someone with eyes outside to answer me. What the fuck is happening? Another voice came over the radio. Multiple hostiles spotted over lower and upper bases. We are under attack, someone else answered. Clicking through the screens, even more of the discs were visible over the above-ground base, already firing off shots at the buildings up there and sending them up in flames. It took everything in me not to just sit in the corner and cower, desperate to believe that this was just a bad dream. We've got worse problems. The dark matter escaped when the power went out. It's not good, he said. Should I run? I was trying to come up with any kind of plan to get out of here, job be damned. The only way of escape I knew of was through the tunnel back up to upper base though. Even if I managed to escape up there, there's still the problem of these damned flying saucers that would probably evaporate me on sight. Maybe my best hope was just to stay down here, out of sight, out of mind, and wait for everything to calm down before I escape. Aha! Another voice over the radio, screaming out in pain. Help! Send reinforcements to upper base. They're coming in. I flipped the cameras over, watching as the discs let out an even larger beam of light. On the ground where they shone, more of the aliens suddenly began to appear. They looked just like the one laying on the table down the hall, but far more dangerous. A soldier moved towards them, raising his gun and firing off a couple of rounds at one of the aliens' massive head. The bullets stopped in front of it like the Matrix, hovering in midair for a moment before falling harmless to the ground below. The Gray didn't take that particularly well. Honestly, can't say I would blame it. Getting shot at is never something you just shrug off. But it simply looked at the soldier, barely even moving its head. What I saw next was something that no horror movie or years of watching Live Leak could have prepared me for. Something picked the shooter up, raising him into the air with invisible hands. He struggled against it, begging it to let him go. Before anyone else could step up to help, though, he began folding in on himself. I couldn't hear the bones cracking over the cameras, thank God, but I could vaguely hear his screams of pain as they were caught by the small microphone. He kept folding, smaller and smaller, until he was barely the size of a baseball, compressed into an orb of flesh and pulverized bone, dripping blood as it hovered there over the ground. "Oh my God!" I muttered as the gray simply moved its head slightly, sending the flesh ball flying through the stomach of another soldier that was approaching. Punched straight through the poor guy, making a huge hole as it blew chunks of intestines and bone through his back. The gray continued on, unimpeded as it simply crushed anyone that got in its way. I could only watch in terror as it walked calmly through a dozen men, taking them all out without even lifting a finger. More began to beam down to the surface, following it toward its goal and joining the march. "Fall back. Air support is inbound." The radio cackled to life once more. On one of the big monitors, I could see a jet take off from one of the nearby runways, already beginning to veer back around so it could fire a shot at the discs floating nearby. 2 choppers took off around the same time, taking their own positions close by. Before I knew it, the plane and choppers all fired off their shots, aiming for the cluster of discs. A bright flash of light came from the disc closest to the ground, causing munitions to explode in midair before they could even touch the alien vessels. A small laser erupted from it next, quickly spinning around the edge of the disc. As it passed through the choppers and plane in a clean arc, they split, flames engulfing them from the subsequent explosion. It was pure hell outside. Nothing we had could possibly stand up to these things. There was no other choice but to run, except I couldn't. The Greys would be coming through the tunnel, and that was my only way out. The other way was the cells, and after hearing about the darkness escaping, I don't think it was worth the risk. All I could do was wait. There's no point risking a direct run in unless I wanted to die horribly. No, it was time to hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. I got up, closed the door, locked it, and tried to move what spare furniture I had in front to block it off further. If anything got in here, I only had my handgun on me, and God knows that's like hunting a bear with a water gun. Nope, got to play this smart and avoid any kind of confrontation. If only it was that easy. I kept my eyes on the monitors after that, tracing movements of the Greys while keeping an eye on the lower cells. They were, well, the dark matter obviously wasn't in its cell anymore. The lights were on, but they were simply illuminating the bright white room now. Where the darkness managed to go, I'm not really sure. There were a dozen guards stationed at each end of the cell block, though, each shining a UV light around, trying to illuminate any shadowy corners where it could have been hiding. Another explosion made the ground under my feet tremble. The Greys had broken through the tunnel now and begun a slow but deliberate descent towards the lower base. They would probably pass me in around 10 minutes, meaning I just needed to keep holding out. The other monitor showed that my time here was coming to an end, though. The lights flickered when that explosion came through, plunging the cell block hallway into total darkness for just a fraction of a second. That was all the dark matter needed, though. It must have used that brief time to flank around the soldiers at one end of the hall, and as they were still flinging their lights around desperately, shadows suddenly began to swallow them one by one. It was like, well, it was almost cartoonish. They were just falling right into these massive pits of darkness that would appear in the wall or floor, like a damned cartoon gag. But when they got sucked in, it looked painful, like they were entering a black hole and being torn into shreds as it pulled them in. "Hey man, let me in." Someone began knocking at my door. They sounded terrified. Can't say I blamed them. "Come on, they're coming. Don't let them get me, please. Hold on. I've got to move the furniture." I shouted back through, starting to move the chairs. Please, Wash, hurry. They're gonna kill me if they see me. He shouted back through as I was starting to unlock the door. I froze instead, hand just about to turn the deadbolt and let him through. Slowly, I turned back to the monitors, afraid that I was right about what I was about to see. The only other person on base I had spoken to and given my name were the commanding officer on Upper Base and Mills. Neither of them were here tonight. Sure enough, as I faced the monitor, I saw the room that the doppelganger was being held in empty. Wayash, let me in, the voice shouted again. Something was off about it, like it was more than one voice saying the same thing, but talking out of turn so they didn't quite harmonize. Let mine. All I could do was pile the chairs in front of the door again, desperately hoping it would go away. I don't know how it knew my name, but when it spoke, my blood ran cold. There was pure malice in its voice, and all I could feel was that it was going to hurt me. I got this distinct feeling that it didn't want to kill me though, only inflict as much pain as it could. My blood ran cold as I made my way back behind my desk, climbing under it and holding hands over my ears as it just kept screaming at me. The voice kept changing, turning into other people as it first begged me to let it in, then turned more violent, demanding that I open the door for it to get through. Before long it must have gotten bored though, because it stopped knocking on the door and shouting. I waited a few minutes, afraid if I came out of my hiding spot it would just be waiting there on the other side of the desk. That huge grin full of teeth ready to devour me within seconds as soon as it saw me. I took a deep breath, crawling out little by little as the monitors above me blared with chaos. Everything on Upper Base was a disaster, fire all over the place. Even if I can get through the tunnel and get back there, making it through the flames was going to be a whole other challenge. God, I didn't even know if my car was crushed out there considering all the carnage. A walk through the desert in the middle of the night was almost as dangerous as the aliens attacking from every direction. The lights flickered again as another explosion rocked the base. Looking at the monitors, I could see the grays approaching my section of the tunnel. All I could do was keep quiet, hoping that they didn't try to look in here as they continued along their warpath. Too much to ask, especially for my luck. The first gray that was leading the pack stopped in front of my door. It raised a hand and I heard the metal begin to bend and creak. Diving back under the desk, I pulled myself in as much as I could, desperate to avoid being seen as it ripped the door from the hinges without even touching it. Pretty sure I involuntarily squealed a little when the door hit the wall, falling to the floor with an even louder bang as the gray stepped into the room. I saw its feet as it walked around for a moment, inspecting its surroundings for whatever it was looking for. It stopped in front of the monitors, staying there for the longest minute of my life as it studied them before walking back out, leading the rest of the grays forward. At that point, I could only assume they were after the one that was laying in a cell down the hall. Guess aliens have the same code of no man left behind that we do. Who says we have nothing in common, right? Too bad they were slaughtering us to make sure it happened. I have to get out of here. There's no excuses now. I was exposed to the dangers outside without a door on the hinges. I had to move, fast. Looking at the monitors, the grays were far enough ahead in the tunnel that I could slip out without them noticing. I poked my head out, making sure there were no stragglers that could fold me like origami with their mind, and started my escape. Running as fast as I could towards Upper Base, I was quickly out of breath. The incline in here was killer, and God knows it's at least a couple of miles directly up. Nevertheless, I've got to keep trying. I managed to get maybe halfway there before I came across a body. It was slumped next to a wall, head down and blood all over the front of its uniform. As I got closer, trying to give it a wide berth, it began to cough. I paused, unsure of what my next move should be. If it's another soldier, the obvious answer is that I should help, right? But then there was the other chance nagging at the back of my mind. I've had this pit in my stomach since the run-in with the doppelganger. This guy could just be that damn thing trying to lure in prey. If it is, well, then trying to help him is a death sentence. Help. A weak voice came through the coughing. Hell. I can't leave them in good conscience to die on the slight chance they could be that damned monster. I know it goes against self-preservation, but I can't just leave him here. Hey man, what the hell got you? I said, moving toward him slowly, his head tilted a little, looking for where my voice was coming from. As he looked up, I could see that although he was pretty messed up, he was definitely human. His throat was slashed pretty bad though, and judging by the amount of blood everywhere, he wasn't making it out of this tunnel. Damned thing disguised itself as one of us. He gurgled out, the doppelganger then. It had been through here already. Shit, was I gonna have to face it when I get to upper base? Before I could think further, he kept talking. He tore out their throats with his damn teeth, ate them while they were still screaming. I tried stabbing him, but he slashed me. Oh, I don't think I'm gonna make it. It's cold. Hey, stay with me. Okay? I'm going to get help and come back here for you. All right? I said. Is that death? He asked, pointing towards the tunnel going to lower base. I looked forward, squinting as the light seemed to dim. It was definitely getting darker. Oh shit, was all I could get out before a long shadow appeared in the middle of the room, steadily getting closer as it made its way out. God knows what this thing can do once it hits outside, but I wasn't about to stay around here and figure it out. I grabbed the soldier, hoisting him over my shoulder and starting to move as fast as we could. This guy was dead weight, almost cold to the touch too, not able to contribute at all to escaping certain death. We got a few feet before I tripped over one of his legs while trying to haul his limp body, dropping him as I fell to the ground. The shadow caught up, taking hold of one of his feet first, then slowly drawing the rest of him in, whatever blood he had left in there slowly seeping out as it crumpled his body into shadow. Look, it might seem like I got over it quick, but I promise once the dark had him, there was no saving him. Instead, I ran my ass off, heading towards upper base as fast as I could in the hopes that I could outrun that primordial dark that was still devouring a man behind me. After a minute, I could tell I was getting close. Smoke began to fill the tunnel, causing me to nearly choke as I ran, gasping for breath desperately. Emerging from the tunnel almost made me want to go back in and chance it with the darkness. The discs filled the sky above and everything was on fire. I had to move carefully, afraid that they were going to vaporize me in seconds if they caught sight of me. My best bet was to go around the main building and find my way to the parking lot. If my car wasn't totaled, then I could maybe wait out the discs until they leave, then get the hell out of Dodge. It was a pretty far-fetched plan, but it was all I had at the time. Slowly, sticking to whatever shadows I could with the fear that they might devour me any second, I made my way from the tunnel entrance to the R&D building. Logically, the parking lot was on the other side of it, so I could just go straight through the building and out the other side, minimizing my risk of being seen by the discs or the Greys as they made their return trip. Inside of R&D was rough. There were various aircraft in differing stages of construction, with pieces and parts all over the place. Different testing arrays lit up on one side of the massive hangar, while down at the far end, there was something making a continuous beeping noise. Further on to my left, I could see one of the discs, the one that we had in our inventory from the old crash. The big laser cutter was still sitting nearby, lights blinking on a control panel to show it had been abandoned mid-use. A loud crash made me jump. Just up ahead, in shadows between the fluorescent bulbs, was a soldier. He had pushed something over, seemingly on the hunt for something in the huge hangar. I tried to hide from it, trying to quietly duck towards one of the walls and out of the fluorescent lights where it could see me. Unfortunately for me, this place was a mess, and I tripped over a rolling toolbox that was in the path, causing it to crash to the ground. Not sure what I expected to happen, but the creature let out a roar when it heard the noise, now aware that it wasn't alone in here. The roar was quickly stifled though, instead being replaced by a discordant voice that phased in and out of normal range, moving from male to female, adult to child as it tried to modulate. As it's turned, I kept gonna try and hide, even though it felt futile. "Come here," it shouted, moving towards where I was ducked down behind a workbench. "Son of a bitch, Get over here. As it got closer, I could feel the sense of dread in my stomach growing. I couldn't make out the face, covered in shadows, but where its eyes were seemed to be shining, reflecting little bits of light like a predator's will in the dark, looking for its next meal. I don't know if it could see in the dark, but I could swear it was homing in on me with ease. Wash, it's you, the doppelganger shouted now. Shit, it must have seen me. I had to make a run, hell with giving my position away. If I was faster, I could make it to the far door and get the hell out of here before it had a chance to catch up. Come here. It moved fast, faster than I had ever seen any human move in my life, seemingly going down on all fours to run at me faster. As it closed in, I fell back, crashing to the ground beside the disc as it gained ground on me. Looking around, I grabbed my gun from its holster, leveling it at the doppelganger and firing. My aim was good, and the bullet hit it right in the face, making its head blast back for a moment. Now, why would you do that? Said again. The voice was more discordant this time, hundreds of different inflections and tones all fighting for supremacy under the tide of noise. The prevailing feeling I got from it now wasn't just malice, it was anger. I had pissed it off, and now it really wanted to hurt me, even more so than before. I scrambled, firing off more shots into the monster. They each hit, but did nothing when it came to slowing it down. The bullets were useless, and as I looked around, my only options were crowbars, various mechanic tools, and the laser. I have no idea how to use this damn thing, so I just had to hope that when it was left here, they had already primed it so it was ready to go. The doppelganger lurched frontward, screaming at me in an ancient language I couldn't understand. I turned the dial on the console all the way towards the top to max it out and hit the green button that was lit up next to it. The light that came out of that thing was practically blinding. I closed my eyes, turning my head as it flashed. I could hear the damned creature screaming even louder now and smelled something burning as the laser hit it. After a moment, the light died down and I finally opened my eyes. The doppelganger lay on the ground, half its face melted and the entire torso on fire. It was twitching on the ground, still cursing me in an ancient language, but unable to keep moving. I'll be honest, I wasn't going to wait to see what happened to it. I ran, heading towards the back door and bursting through it. On the other side of the road, there was the parking lot. My car was parked in the back corner, and from the looks of it, still intact. I kept to the back wall, desperate to avoid being seen, and continued slowly moving across the road towards my car. After a moment, I finally made it, pulling out keys and unlocking the door manually so the lights didn't alert anything to my presence. Before I could get in, I looked across at the burning base and tunnel entrance to see the Greys emerge. The one that had been prisoner was floating alongside the others, levitating out of the tunnel with whatever powers they had used to tear dozens of soldiers apart. As they emerged, the discs began to shine their lights down, beaming them up into the ships one by one. Just to be safe, I ducked down in my seat and waited to see if they would leave. After the last Grey was picked up, the discs fired off a few more lasers before rising further into the sky, suddenly blinking out and disappearing completely. As they left, a laser suddenly hit the R&D building, causing it to explode and hit me with a blast of heat. That was the last thing I needed to tell me that this wasn't the place to be. Turning the key, I threw it into drive and hit the gas, nearly smashing into another car when it lurched forward. I steered around it, hitting the road and flooring the pedal towards the entrance. The guard arm was down, but I smashed straight through it, unwilling to wait for it to raise. Not like there was still La Garde at the gate to raise it anyway. The flames were in my rear view for almost 20 minutes, burning into the night sky as I drove as far away as I fucking could. I came home, surprised a cop didn't pull me over for speeding. At some point, a bunch of fire trucks passed me, heading towards the base to deal with the chaos I had left behind. About 6 hours ago, I walked in the door of my apartment and haven't looked back. Typing this up just seems silly now, considering all that I've gone through in the past 12 hours. I've been looking out my window every 5 minutes, waiting to see black vans roll up ready to cart me off to some black site where I'll never be heard from again. I don't think I'll be lucky enough to have some aliens come break me out if they do take me, but goddamn it, they're real. They're out there. We are not alone. If this country is smart, they won't try picking any more fights with them. I don't like spiders. I don't like it when they bunch themselves up so their legs look like tangled wires, and I don't like it when they spread themselves out like the radial spokes on a wheel. It was bad luck that, when I met my wife, we discovered we were both scared of them. As the man, I kinda just wound up taking over spider-killing duty. At first this meant squealing while trying to lob a shoe at one of them from a distance, but as the years went on, I kinda just got tired of the stress and anxiety. Fear is exhausting, so is the pageantry of it. Jumping up and shouting and lots of running around. Over time, I found myself having less and less of a fear reaction to them. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want one crawling on my face, but it wasn't like they had me running away in fear every time. Lily was never great with them either, but it wasn't what I'd call worthy of therapy. For the first 10 years I knew her, she was a fairly run-of-the-mill arachnophobe. Things only got bad after this one night when we'd just come back in from an evening with friends. There'd been a storm outside, windy as hell. I remember putting the keys down on the table by the door, and when I looked back, she was pulling down the hood of her coat. She let out a sigh, ran her hands through her hair, and she looked a little puzzled by what she'd felt. When she lifted her hand away, there were thin black legs poking out from between her fingers. It took a second for her to react to what was all bunched up inside her cupped hand. Then she screamed and threw it onto the ground. I saw it for only a second. It was so fast. Then it was off and under the nearest door, and my number one concern became comforting my wife, who was having a full-blown panic attack. "Get it off, get it off, get it off," she screamed while slapping at her neck and hair. I hugged her tight, checked her hair, and then checked it again when she asked me to. Then she stripped her top off to make sure nothing else was clinging to her clothes, before I took her into the kitchen and we had a cup of tea while she kept scratching at the back of her head. "Little fucker," she half cried, half laughed. "I can't believe it. Did you see it? It was huge. One of the biggest yet," I said. Truthfully, I only had half-glimpsed memories of it scuttling away, but it had been big. Large enough that a pint glass wouldn't have fit over its darting legs. Just seeing it had left me feeling anxious, but at the time I ignored my own discomfort. After all, I'd hardly been the real victim. "And it got away," she cringed. "Oh God, it's still in this house somewhere, isn't it?" I wanted to lie but thought better of it. "Somewhere, yeah," I said, "but we'll spider-proof the bedroom tonight and I'll go looking in the morning." "Thank you," she smiled mournfully. "Jesus, I just know I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight." She made me strip the bed before she got in it. And all night she kept flicking at her fringe and the hair on the back of her neck. I felt so bad for her. If that had been me, I can't say I would have reacted much better. Neither of us slept that well, but I was mostly just worried about her. When you love someone, it's tough to see them suffer. But it wasn't just that one night. The second one was much the same. The third, fourth, and so on. It petered out a little in the second week, but then she saw a spider on some TV show and the anxiety came back full force. Every night was the same. I had to strip the bed of everything, lift the mattress, and check for spiders. She even got rid of her bedside table so there'd be less hiding places for one. In the meantime, I was on hunting duty. In her own words, I had to find the bastard or she'd never feel safe in that house again. It's funny, but in hindsight, I can't really say what I saw go scuttling under the doorway that first night, but I do know I didn't try all that hard to find it. I remember finding some webs under the living room sofa that were real odd. The fibers were thick like the fake stuff they bring out on Halloween, and I had to peel them off the carpet like Velcro. I found a couple of these nests throughout the house, but I never mentioned them. One of them hid a hole in the floor that really should have alarmed me, but I just ignored it. I ignored a lot, actually. I found dead mice spun up in cocoons, and something bore a hole through one of the kitchen cupboards and filled it with silk. Nothing normal about that, but I just covered it up with some cans and moved on. A behavior I find hard to explain in hindsight. Maybe my attention was elsewhere. Lily wasn't in a great place, and she was slowly getting worse. She cried a lot, and any little thing that touched her skin would result in lots of panicked yelling. She couldn't eat a meal without slapping at her arms and neck every few seconds. Things got real bad when I came back one night to find her shaving her head. She told me she got tired of mistaking the feeling of her own hair for a spider, so this was the simplest way to feel clean and safe. If you've ever lived with anyone who's had a breakdown, there's usually this moment where your heart sinks as you realize that what you're dealing with has transcended the norm. It's quite frightening, actually. Reminded me of when my mum found a lump. It's a very isolating sort of fear. I remember lying awake in bed that night and just thinking about how I'd found Lily bent over the bath, shaver in hand, with a patchy head like that doll from Toy Story. When she looked over her shoulder at me, she smiled and her eyes were so wide. I felt like I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. Have you ever missed someone while you still live with them? Made them coffee and breakfast and chatted about your day? But it's like nobody's there? Every day was the same. I'd tell her about work, and she'd tell me about how she'd scrubbed the bedroom top to bottom looking for spiders, or started pulling up the bathroom tiles to check for nests. At one point I realized she'd taken a lot of time off work, but she wouldn't give me a straight answer, so I had to call her office. They wouldn't even answer my calls, which I had to take as a pretty bad sign. Came as a relief when she got sectioned. Everything came out all at once. She tried putting a hammer to one of the walls to find what was behind it, not realizing that it was just the neighbor's living room on the other side. I was at work during all this, but things clearly escalated pretty quickly, and the police arrived to find a partially bald woman screaming about spiders in the walls. By the time I got home, they'd already taken her to be assessed at the local hospital. I rushed to visit her, but in the meantime I had to call her parents, and it was a relief because I wasn't alone anymore. Other people knew what was going on, and that made it a little easier for me to navigate. Until then, I'd been afraid to mention it to anyone. I guess I was a little embarrassed, or maybe just not sure what the etiquette was for discussing someone else's mental health. She was only gone about a night, not even 12 hours really. The neighbors agreed not to press charges if I paid for all the repairs, and Lily got therapy. Lily's parents are quite well off, so they helped us out with that. They found this clinic that she stayed at for a couple of weeks. It specialized in exposure therapy, which really just means getting a person used to their phobia. Don't like water? Spend hours every day in a pool. Don't like moths? Step into a room with thousands of them. This is oversimplification, of course. It's a special program that involves gradual increases in the nature of the exposure. The first night she called me and told me they'd had her looking at pictures of a spider and talking about her experience. They were literally just cartoony drawings, but she told me she found it hard anyway. She cried and I cried too. She was only a few hours' drive away, but I didn't want to be away from her, and everything had happened so suddenly. It was only 6 weeks between that night with the storm and her ending up in that clinic, but in that short period of time I felt like the ground had fallen from beneath my feet. 2 weeks she was in there. I don't remember them well. There were phone calls every night. She was getting better, she told me, and the doctor confirmed as much. Hard going, for sure. They had to sedate her the day she graduated from cartoons to actual photos of spiders. Apparently she scratched an orderly up real bad. My time in the house was lonely. Little weird too, if I'm honest. I woke up at one point with cobwebs in my hair, and at some point I realized that I hadn't seen a spider in my home for a long time. Not even a little money spider. I briefly wondered about what the hell had been leaving cobwebs around the place, but never followed up on it. It's hard to get my thoughts straight. I do remember finding more dead mice all webbed up in the back of that kitchen cupboard. One morning I came down to find a starling cocooned on the outside of the kitchen window. No sign of what did it thought. I just stared at it and sipped my coffee. Then I left for work, and when I came back it was gone. Probably not a good time to tell you I was diagnosed with a kind of dementia some time ago. I guess that's supposed to help make sense of things, right? I don't know. Doesn't feel like it makes sense to me. It's not like Alzheimer's runs in my family. They say the neurons of a human brain with Alzheimer's look like a cobweb that's had holes poked in it. That's a good way to describe how my mind feels to live inside. Thoughts travel along a given route and then just drop off. Lily's therapy progressed nicely, though. I remember that quite clearly. The phone calls and the sound of her voice. Real vivid. Jesus, I missed her so bad during this time. I hate being overly sentimental, but it had been a tough and lonely 6 weeks. And hearing her sound increasingly happy and confident with each new phone call was like a shot of pure happiness right into my veins. I missed her, and I wanted her back. And when she told me, giggling with joy, that she'd held a little spider on day 10, I burst out crying right with her. I felt pride at her accomplishment, and I felt relief that things might be getting back on track for us. Like the nightmare was finally going to be over. It wasn't so simple when I saw her in person. She came back looking like the war-wounded. I should say she looked beautiful, but I want to be honest. I smiled when I saw her, but it didn't reach my eyes because the woman who got into the car looked a lifetime apart from the woman who'd been living with me just a few months ago. She was thin as a rake, with ashy pallid skin and a shaved head that made her look like a matchstick. And her eyes, the look in them wasn't right. But she was smiling, so I swallowed the funny feeling I had in my stomach and pretended everything was okay. There was no work for her to go back to, and I managed to get some time off after speaking to my boss. It was just us, and that can be a weird feeling for a couple used to working 9 to 5. I was on edge, didn't know what to expect. She smiled a lot, tried her best to reassure me, and I asked a lot about what therapy was like, and she told me it was fantastic. Showed me photos of her sitting next to big house spiders, some as wide as her palm. Had to fight back my own fear while looking at them. She told me that was day 13, but when I asked what happened on day 14, she said it was mostly just packing up and saying goodbye. There is a dark and uncomfortable truth to relationships, and it's that time only flows in one direction. My wife hadn't done anything wrong, and I didn't really feel any ill will towards her, but a distance had been placed between us. All the best will in the world couldn't undo it. She'd changed. Been changed, I guess. At the time, I didn't know how to understand any of it, but I wasn't sure how to treat her. When I kissed her, it was on the cheek. When I held her, it was like hugging a female coworker. I didn't know what my own feelings were, and I wouldn't until I found her one morning in the kitchen tapping away at a pint glass and giggling like a toddler. It wasn't the light and airy laughter of the woman I was used to. It was more like the laughter of a bunch of kids egging on a fight or cheering on a nasty bully. She didn't speak when she looked at me. She just turned back to the glass and kept laughing, flicking it gently with her fingers. When I walked around the table, I saw it under there. A very large house spider. I don't know what is normal for people around the world, but a UK house spider is big if its legs are wider than the palm of your hand. This thing was even bigger, with legs bundled up against the side of the glass like spools of segmented wool, and seeing it made me jump way back. I realized I hadn't seen another spider since the night of the storm, and that thing all curled up with legs as thick as hairpins was a real shock to my system. I cried out, and my wife, she started howling with laughter. I mean, it was like a toddler discovering cartoons for the first time. Manic and weird and just so fucking happy, but in a way that was a little alien because I didn't understand the thoughts and feelings that went into that ear-splitting cackle, and it was all wrong coming from her. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. She just laughed until something in her got tired, and she slowly stopped giggling, but she still didn't say anything even after she'd gone quiet. In the end, it was me who broke the silence. I didn't have a clue what to say. The whole time she was staring at me with her patchy hair and gleeful teary eyes, and I got so desperate to break the standoff that I stammered out the words, "He's a big one, ain't he?" Her face relaxed. Her shoulders slumped. She slipped out of the crazy like it was only ever an outfit. "They'll get bigger," she said, and then she lifted the glass, snatched the spider up, and stuffed it into her mouth. I didn't see it. Not fully, but I stood, frozen in terror, and watched the muscles in her badly shaved head tense and relax as her jaw worked away, crunching at those hardened legs. Jesus Christ. The sounds were bad enough, but when she was done, she looked over her shoulder at me and smiled, and her teeth were smeared green and black with littles of bits of leg and chitin still stuck between the gums. I'm not entirely sure what happened next, but now I knew why I'd felt so different around her since she'd come back. I was afraid of her like a kid around an abusive parent. I just didn't know what I was going to get. There was always this energy in the room that had me on edge. I'd sit there watching TV, but I wasn't really watching. Couldn't have told you what was on half the time. Instead, every ounce of my being was focused on her. Every breath, every motion. When she got up to use the toilet, I watched her intensely to see what she was going to do. The fact that she rarely did anything except carry on as normal was all the more unsettling because I knew something was wrong and I couldn't stop remembering the way she'd laughed with that thing under the glass. Nights were bad. A lot of the time I'd wake and get the feeling she'd just been watching me, but she was usually fast asleep, or at least that's how it looked. Sometimes there were furtive movements like she'd just rolled over. I got used to it, thought it was probably just in my head. But then one night I woke up and she was right there, face inches away from mine. I cried out, couldn't help it, shuffled backwards while trying to avoid touching her and wound up falling off the bed. When I looked up from the floor, she had a completely blank expression. She was just looking at me like a cat watching a fly. "What are you doing?" I cried out, unable to stop the irritation from bleeding into my voice. She shrugged, "Just watching." Then she rolled over like nothing had happened. That night, I slept on the sofa. She didn't ask why, didn't say a word as I grabbed my things and left the bedroom. I wasn't sure I would manage to fall asleep after that, but I did. And when I woke up, I had cobwebs in my hair. I was lucky if I slept more than a few hours a night after that. Came fitfully, if at all. I woke up too many times to the feeling of something tickling my face and chest, a sensation like someone running a feather over me. Every time I'd come to in a panic, but I never found anything except nearly invisible silk clinging to my skin. Life without sleep was difficult, and I struggled to hide my dislike for Lily. Over time, our habits and routines diverged even further apart. I stopped going upstairs almost entirely, just didn't need to. I had work and the sofa and the kitchen, and the days when I came back and barely saw Lily at all were fine by me. I preferred being away from her, something that kind of broke my heart, if I'm honest. There were times I wanted to reach out, but looking at her gave me the funniest feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to change things, didn't want to get closer. If anything, I wanted to run away. And I don't mean that I wanted to flee my life and adult responsibilities in some abstract way. I mean, I felt a powerful urge to quite literally run away from her. It was horrible feeling that way about my wife, and just trying to understand those emotions was enough to give me a headache most days. I became real forgetful during this time, and it was a long time before I realized I'd forgotten to pay for the repairs to the wall. I think it slipped my mind. Emphasis on think because I don't remember what I have and haven't forgotten. I just nailed some plywood over and left it, and 3 months later, one day, out of the blue it occurred to me I should probably have done something more about it. I did find a toolkit in the kitchen that wasn't mine. I might have called someone out for a quote. I don't know. But once I remembered that I'd never actually fixed the hole, I was filled with this shame and embarrassment, and I decided the best thing to do was to face it head on and go apologize to my neighbor. I never knew a lot about the guy. He was an older man who liked his football, had a nose like a tomato, and spent most nights in the pub. I knew he lived alone though, and when I knocked his door and there was no answer, it wasn't too strange. At least it didn't seem out of the ordinary until I went back inside my house and heard footsteps on the other side of the wall. So I went back and I knocked a couple more times, figuring he maybe hadn't heard me, but there was still no answer. I found this weird. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who'd avoid a neighbor he didn't like. He'd just open the door and tell you to fuck off. I went back and looked but couldn't see anything through his windows, and all I could see looking through his letterbox was a gray sheet across the opening. When my fingers came away covered in a sticky thread, I had this terrible feeling in my stomach. I couldn't have possibly explained how, but I was convinced that Lily had done something. After all, it was him calling the police who'd gotten her into trouble. But it wasn't like I could kick his door down to check, and I wasn't going to go scrambling through any half-open windows. Fortunately, we shared a fence in the back garden. It was easy enough to jump, and from there I checked the windows on that side of the house. He'd left the kitchen blinds open, and at first what I saw baffled me. For a moment I wondered if he was decorating because everything inside was covered by a thin, translucent sheet. But I only had to pay close attention to realize that didn't make sense. When painting a ceiling, you don't throw tarps over half-drunk cups of coffee and plates of moldy food. And the material that covered everything was cloudy and made of thread and obviously some kind of silk. It took a lot of effort to control the urge to just hop the fence back and pretend like I never saw a damn thing. But if he needed some kind of help, then I knew I had to at least try. I looked briefly at the stoop by the back door. There was a lighter on the ground where someone had dropped it. It was strangely conspicuous and made me think that whoever had left it there had done so in a hurry. Didn't make sense that someone would drop it there and not notice, not unless they'd been otherwise occupied. I picked it up and winced when it came from the floor with a sticky tearing sound. It was covered in barely visible silk threads. God, I wanted that back door to be locked. Couldn't think of anything worse than having to push ahead, but I tried the handle and it went down. The door popped open with barely any effort, and I got a good look at how every last inch of that place was covered in pale cobwebs that got thicker and thicker as my eyes drifted deeper inside the house. I couldn't help but wonder if they were strong enough to trap a person. Was my neighbor in there somewhere? Somebody was. I knew that much from the sounds I'd heard, but I couldn't see him in the kitchen. I wanted to cry out for him, maybe even go marching into the house and look for myself. But the hallway out of the kitchen had been turned into a web-lined tunnel. No straight lines, just a dark, silky womb whose rounded funnel walls fluttered gently in the breeze. I stared intently into that darkness, trying my best to see if there was the shape of a man's corpse cocooned somewhere in the pale white silk. I leaned forward, my head and shoulders just moving past the door frame, when the blackness in the tunnel grew legs. Dark carapace and segmented limbs exploded towards me so fast it was almost in the kitchen before my heart had time to skip a beat. And then it stopped halfway into the room, standing perfectly still and brazen in the fading daylight. A bundle of legs the size of a horse. A real-life monster. I didn't move. Jesus Christ, it took me another minute just for my brain to process what I was looking at on a conscious level. My nervous system was quicker, sure. It was like a blanket of disgust and terror was thrown over me. My stomach plunged to the floor. My skin crawled. My heart felt like it was going to explode. But my actual mind was blank. White noise and static. The creature was huge. So big its legs could just about fit in the hallway behind it. But in the kitchen with a little more room, those front limbs and mouthy feelers spread out like tendrils and gripped the doorway. It was ready to pounce on whatever had sent disturbances throughout its web. I've read that spiders can be a little like Venus flytraps. They won't always pounce on a single trigger. They need multiple hits. When I looked down at my feet, I saw that I'd taken just one step inside. But that was all it needed to be alerted. Now it had approached the initial alarm and, half blind, it waited for another hint of something trapped inside its web. I had to wonder, would lifting my shoe count? Did I have a choice? I couldn't stay there. Looking at the damn thing was bringing me closer and closer to full-blown panic with every passing second. I had to do something, and I had to do it with some semblance of control. I slid my foot backwards. The spider didn't move. As soon as both feet were outside, I let go of the door handle and felt something sticky detach from my palm. It feels like an exaggeration to say that lightning moves slower. I'm not sure I have the words to describe how fast it was. I'm sure most of you have seen a nature documentary with one of those fish, or maybe even a trapdoor spider, and you thought, oh shit, that was quick, but this thing, maybe it was just because it was coming right at me. I've never seen anything like it except for when videos get edited. All of a sudden it was just there. And before I knew it, thick woolly paps were pinning me to the ground, and I was looking into a pink slit of a mouth framed by fangs as long as my forearms. They moved independent of each other, and something about the sight of all those wheel-spoke legs and segmented joints clumped together in its thorax sent my mind reeling. I said at the beginning of this that a lifetime of exposure had helped curb my arachnophobia, but there are limits. I blacked out. When I woke up, it was dark all around me. I didn't know it at the time, but the belly of the beast was my neighbor's former living room. It wasn't actually pitch black, but it did take a few terrifying minutes for my eyes to adjust well enough just to be able to see my own body stuck and wriggling beneath me. I was wrapped up tight, and if you've ever heard the refrain that spider silk is stronger than steel and doubted it, well, trust me, it's true. A few thin threads doesn't give you a proper sense of it. But I was wrapped in what must have been a half-inch of the stuff, and I felt like I was wearing 10 layers of lycra that was too small. There was a tiny bit of give, enough to let me move fingers or toes or even bend a knee just a fraction, but that was it. It was horrifying. I'm not exactly claustrophobic either, for what it's worth, but given the circumstances, I found myself panicking as I tried to get some purchase. I kept thinking if I could get a finger hooked into it, then maybe I could start tearing away. I was desperate, but the more I fought, the more I realized it was hopeless. The silk was elastic and strong and covered in a thick, stodgy glue that only further limited my movement as everything I did spread it around until it was gumming my legs and hands together. Wasn't until exhaustion caught up to me and I was forced to take a short break that I realized I wasn't alone. There was another cocoon beside me. My neighbor had been a big man in life, podgy with a large pot belly and a head like a thumb. But in the dim light of that room, he looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin that had been found half decayed in an ancient and forgotten tomb. So thin and desiccated you could hook a finger under the tendons in his neck and jaws. I nearly cried when I realized I'd risked everything to save a dead man, but that wasn't actually true. The error in my thinking became apparent when he opened his eyes and glared at me with pure, unbridled terror. He opened his mouth and I was convinced he was about to scream when instead he coughed and gagged and something wet and brown dribbled out of his mouth. It flopped down his chin and came to rest on the floor between us. It resembled a hairband encased in bile and vomit, and I was momentarily stumped until I saw a thin brown leg unfurl from the tangled mess. It's okay. My neighbor's entire body relaxed, his eyes vacant and confused, as Lily knelt down beside me and stroked my head. "Lily, you've got to get me." "Shoo," she said, pressing a single finger to my lips. "It's okay. It's going to be okay." Behind her, a shadow appeared. It had legs as thick as my wrist, and they reached from the floor to the ceiling. "It won't be much longer now," she added as the darkness behind her grew. "Probably best to just keep you here." "Lily, what the fuck? I told you they'd get bigger," she said, nodding towards the spider my neighbor had just spat onto the floor. "He won't be any real help." She touched my neighbor's head, but he barely responded. He just gazed vacantly as she rolled him over so that he was facing away from me. "For such a clever animal," she added as she parted his hair, "I'm always curious about just how much you miss." Something was clamped around the back of his head. A throbbing bulb of mottled brown skin and hair. It looked like a spider without legs. Tick, maybe. That's what I thought it was until my wife ran a finger playfully along its back and my neighbor let out a gut-wrenching squeal of pain. Slowly, the shape seemed to wriggle and writhe and a long thin leg emerged from beneath its body, and I realized I was looking at a spider wrapped tight around his skull, its legs buried beneath the skin and muscle of his scalp. For a moment it playfully curled the leg in the air before returning it to the incision and sliding it back into place, every inch disappearing with a gruesome wet sound. It displaced muscle and hair, and when it came to rest, I realized just how misshapen his skull had become from all those legs wrapped tight around his head. "What the fuck?" I gasped. "Do you ever find it weird that you can't remember what it looked like? The thing that came running out of her hand?" she asked before reaching over to stroke my head. Her hand came away covered in cobwebs. Something about her touch revolted me. It sent strange shivers coursing through my body. A deep primordial need to get away came over me. That strange revulsion all over again, the same one that had taunted me over and over again over the last few weeks. Without even meaning to, I found myself convulsing and panicking, my body trying to thrash violently, but with every limb constricted by that silk, I could do nothing except writhe around on the floor. I tried with everything I had to move my hands, to get some purchase on the silk and tear away at it to free myself. But it was no use. I could do nothing except glare at my wife and the enormous shadow behind her, the one that towered above us both, its great legs clustering around the floor and ceiling. At some point, I grabbed onto my trousers and clenched my fist and felt something small and hard. The lighter. I knew there was great risk in using it, but I had no choice. I managed to worm my hand into my pocket and find it with my fumbling fingers. My wife seemed oddly aware of what I was doing, and she seemed to tilt her head like a curious dog as I clenched my fist around the small object and used every ounce of willpower I had left to fight the violent seizures that racked my body and thumbed the trigger. The web went up in flames immediately. It must have been the glue, but the flames exploded across the silk like they'd been soaked in kerosene. Before I even realized that it had weakened enough for me to free one arm, the tongues of fire were already spreading across the floor where they found my poor neighbor. The burning sensation that crawled across my legs and chest hurt like nothing I could imagine, but I was finally free. I rolled over and began to push myself up, already desperately patting at my body to try and put out the flames. When I looked around me, my wife and the shape that followed her were gone. For a moment I considered helping my neighbor, but his body thrashed too violently, and although his eyes were wide open, spiders were pouring from his mouth, and I could not summon the courage to take another step towards him. All I could think of was escape. The house was going up like a tinderbox. It wasn't far to the kitchen, but the fire had already beat me there. Smoke billowed upwards and, trapped by the ceiling, started to fill the air with choking soot. The only escape was the back door, and I stumbled towards it but was stopped at the last moment by the sight of my wife standing there. "You really are such a fascinating speck." I barreled past her, but to my surprise she offered no resistance. I merely emerged into the open air, my lungs gasping desperately for clean air as I collapsed onto long, unkempt grass. I looked over my shoulder and saw orange tongues of fire were already leaping out of the windows on the upper floor. Left uncontrolled, the fire would rage and consume the entire row of terrace houses. I felt a moment of remorse, but there were already sirens in the distance, so I knew someone had noticed and done the right thing. But it wasn't over. Lily was sitting on the fence. I don't know how she got there, but she looked completely undisturbed. "I never once imagined that when that wind blew me into your home, I'd find such an interesting pair of people," she said. "What a fun mind to sink my legs into. I really had no idea what I was going to find." "Let her go," I gasped. "I have," she said with a shrug. "I did months ago, as a matter of fact. There were some incompatibilities, and it just made sense to move homes." She pointed at me and smiled. "I've enjoyed living inside your head quite a bit," struggling to make sense of her words, but still somehow aware of their terrifying implications. I placed one hand on the back of my head and felt it. Felt her. The mere touch was enough to fill my mouth with a coppery taste, while my vision blurred at the edges. Something beneath my skin shifted, and I felt a terrible pressure behind my eyes. I had to get rid of her, and I only knew of one weakness. "Oh well," she said as she watched me fumble desperately for the lighter. "Not every relationship has to last forever to be meaningful." I lit my hair on fire. My last memories were of heat and a sudden release of pressure. I couldn't possibly describe it to you. Not really. Something slid out of my skull, and Lily waved at me from the fence before she seemed to blink out of existence, and then nothing. Not even darkness. Just total absence. I wouldn't regain a sense of self until the hospital several weeks later. There was nothing left of either house, but they did manage to control the fire before it spread to the others. I'm sure there was still some damage, and to this day I feel guilty about it. I think I was charged with arson. Maybe more. I have vague memories of being wheeled into a courtroom. The doctors have agonized over me for a long time, and one mentioned amateur trepanation. He said I must have practiced it on my wife, at least based on the body they found in my neighbor's house. But I can't really be sure of anything. I am forever dipping in and out of reality. Writing this down has been difficult. I'm not entirely aware where I am right now. One doctor told me I might make some kind of recovery if it was just normal brain damage. But he'd never seen anything like it, so he couldn't be sure. Feels like it's a different doctor every time I see them. Then again, I don't always recognize myself when I look in the mirror. Of course, that could just be the burns, but I reckon even then I still look a fair bit older than I should. There is one orderly who's stuck around long enough to get to know me. He knows me by name, smiles a lot when he sees me, talks to me about all sorts of things. He seems genuinely interested in me and what I remember. I called him in once to get rid of a spider that had spun a web on the window outside, and he did so with a warm smile. I told him I was deathly afraid of them, and he said he already knew that, but I shouldn't worry because he was going to keep an eye on me and make sure nothing bad happened. I'm glad he's around. Ever since he started working here, I haven't seen many of the nasty little things hanging around my room. I guess he's not that bothered by them, at least not if the cobwebs in his hair are anything to go by. The buzz of my county-issued radio crackled through the quiet hum of my truck's AC. The sun, not yet to the 9th hour, already pressed down on Luna County. Unit 12 to dispatch. What V you got, Sandy? I said into the mic. Mac, got a call. It's a strange one. Hiker out by the Crimson Spires reported a body. Said well, you'll need to see it. Near Coyote Jaw Arch. A muscle moved in my jaw. Coyote Jaw Arch was no place for a man on foot for pleasure. It lay an hour or more from the last dirt road where it rutted out into the wilderness, set deep within the broken land of ravines and stone mesas that spread eastward from the town. Young Deputy Miller is on his way. Sounded a bit green on the line. Sandy said, figures. Tell him to secure the scene. Don't touch anything, and wait for me. I said, will do, Mac. And be careful. The hiker sounded spooked. Really spooked. Sandy said finally. I made a sound and put the microphone on its hook. Spooked out here could mean the sun is in a man's head making pictures on the air, or it could mean something else. The truck clawed its way over the last miles, the transmission in low range, the tires throwing up skirts of dust and gravel as I worked it through ruts deep enough to take a lesser vehicle down to its axles. Then the ground rose too steep and too broken for the truck, and I stopped it in the thin shadow of a Palo Verde. I took my pack and the canteens and my sidearm, the camera and the evidence kit. The walk-in was like walking into a furnace. The air above the red rock trembled in the heat, and the only sounds were the crush of my boots on the baked soil, and now and then the angry Z of a horsefly that circled in the still air. When I saw Miller's county vehicle parked near the edge of a dry wash where the earth fell away, sweat had soaked my shirt to my skin. He stood at the lip of a small canyon, looking into it, his shoulders drawn up. Miller, I greeted, my voice a little raspy. What's the situation? He turned and I saw the relief on his young face. He was perhaps 23. Detective Cole, sir. Thank God you're here. He swallowed and made a motion with one hand that trembled. Down there, at the foot of that pillar. I looked where he pointed. 40 feet below us the scree sloped down to the floor of the small canyon. A single shaft of stone stood there, a hoodoo, its form like a long finger of rock worn thin by wind and time. And at the foot of it, in the shadows that lay mottled on the ground, there was something. Even from that high ground I saw that it was wrong. I raised the binoculars to my eyes and brought the scene into focus. My breath froze. It was not at the foot of the stone pillar. It was on the pillar, or it seemed to be, as if it grew from the rock itself some 10 feet from the ground where a narrow shelf of stone jutted out, a shelf no wider than a man's 2 feet set side by side. The body, a man by the width of the shoulders, was seated upright, yet it was not the posture of a man seated but of a thing made rigid. The limbs were set wrong, one arm stretched out from the body, the bones of the fingers showing as if they pointed to the west where the sun would fall. The other arm was bent and laid in the lap as if in a poor imitation of rest. The skin of the man was a dark leather, stretched tight upon the bones beneath. It looked like he had cured in that relentless heat for weeks. I went down the slope, the broken rock sliding under my boots, and Miller followed, his movements clumsy on the uncertain grade. The air down in the cut was thick. It smelled of dust and hot rock and another smell beneath that, a dry and pungent smell with a sharper note to it, an acrid bite that I could not name. There was no smell of the body's decay, and that was another thing that was wrong. When I came closer, I saw the terrible craft of it. The arm that pointed was not bare skin and bone alone. Segments of cholia, barbed and vicious, had been woven into the flesh of it, through the flesh of it, so that the cactus formed a kind of armor over the bones. Where the muscle had drawn away from the arm, polished stones from a riverbed had been pushed into the hollows. Milky quartz and agate that was banded, and they glowed softly in the shadow. They were wedged between the bones and the dried sinew as if whoever did this thing meant to replace what the desert itself would have taken in its own time. The head of the man was canted to one side. The face, what I could see of it, was hidden by a mask. Not a mask a man might buy. It was made of clay, the color of the earth, and it was dried and cracked by the sun. 2 small holes for eyes, a line for a mouth. A crude thing. It made the man beneath it not a man. A thin line of black ants moved in their fashion across the clay of the mask and down the line of the throat to disappear into the collar of the man's shirt. Miller spoke then, voice shaky. "Sir, who do you think would do this?" I looked at him, but I showed him nothing of what I felt. This was an artist. I looked at the man there on the rock, at the terrible care of it. A very sick one. There was only the sound of the ants as they moved on the clay and the sound of the hot wind as it sighed through the rock passages of the canyon. Whoever had made this thing knew the desert, and he had taken its stark soul and made of it a stage for this. I took the camera from my pack. Documenting this would take time. It would be a long and evil labor, and I knew with a certainty colder than a desert night that this would not be the last of his work. The dead man from Coyote Jaw Arch lay under the white lights of the county morgue. Dental records gave him a name, Thomas Ashton, 45 years of age, from Tucson. He had been missing 3 days, a birdwatcher come to the desert. Dr. Ramirez worked over him through the afternoon. She was a woman of calm demeanor, acquainted with the desert's tally of heat and thirst and broken bones from falls. But Ashton was of a different ledger. I stood in that room with her and mostly I listened. The office moved with a quiet purpose that did not speak of the tremor that Ashton, his body arranged like some grim sentinel, had sent through our small number. Young Miller had been sent home. He had said little after we left the arch, that he was scarred by what he had seen there. "The desiccation," Ramirez said, peeling off her gloves, her voice tired but precise. "It's accelerated, beyond anything natural. We're talking about something that should take weeks, months, even condensed into maybe 72 hours tops." She pointed to a magnified image on her screen showing skin cells. "There's evidence of a chemical agent, some kind of aggressive desiccant, almost a tanning solution, but cruder. Sprayed on, I think. Post-mortem. So he was killed," I said. "Then placed. Then this treatment." "Precisely. Cause of death for Ashton appears to be blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Quick, almost merciful, considering what came after." She shook her head. "The cholia insertions are deliberate, almost surgical in their placement despite the brutality. No defensive wounds suggesting he was awake for that part. Thank God. The clay mask? formed directly on his face. The ants? Mac, those ants were from a specific harvester colony I've only seen a few miles from the arch, near the old cinder cone. They don't naturally congregate like that. They were introduced. Someone is bringing tools to his work, I said. I felt a coolness on my own skin. Someone strong, with knowledge of the terrain and an unnerving amount of patience. And specific natural resources. I said finally. The days that followed, I looked through old reports of men gone missing. I read the small words written on the internet by people who lived in this county, looking for talk of strange camps, of men who kept to themselves in the wild places. I spoke to the rangers of the parks and the men from the government lands and the old ranchers whose lands stretched out for 50 miles around Coyote Jaw Arch. No one had seen such a thing, or no one would say if they had. Thomas Ashton was a man with no apparent enemies. No strange ways about him save that he had come to this place to watch birds and had met this end. The pressure from the county sheriff, a good man but worried about tourist season and bad press, was mounting. Find something, Mac. Anything. People are scared. I was finding things, but they were only more questions. The digital trace of Ashton's life led nowhere. The hiker who found him was only a man who liked to walk in the open country and now wished he had not. I thought again and again of the craft of it, the terrible order in that display. It was not the work of rage. It was a thing of obsession. A message. But for who was it meant? The cholya, the polished stones like jewels in the dead flesh, the lines of ants moving on their dark errands. These things began to inhabit my sleep. I would wake in the dark of my own room with the image of Ashton's clay face before my eyes, and I could feel the dry rasp of the desert in my own throat. It was late on the third day since we brought Ashton down from the rock. The sun was a smear of orange and purple at the western rim of the world when Sandy's voice came over the radio. It was not sharp this time. It was low and held tight, and there was a shading in it that was near to dread. Mac, you out there? I was following a half-baked theory about old mining claims near the cinder cone, where Ramirez had mentioned the unique ants. My truck was parked near a collapsed adit, the air cooling rapidly as night approached. Go ahead, Sandy. We got a call from Old Man Henderson. You know him, lives out past the Ghost Rock Flats. I knew him, a man who lived apart from the world, who came to town 2 times a year for what he needed. He called no one. What does he want? I said. He says, Sandy's voice was quieter now. He says his scarecrow started moving. There was a silence then. His scarecrow, I said. That is what he said, Mac. He kept saying it. He said it is out in his west paddock, near the dry well. He said it is different now. He sounded terrified. He will not go near it. He will not look at it again. He just wants us to come. A coldness settled in my belly. Ghost Rock Flats was 30 miles more of bad road, leading out to where the land was empty, but different. Scarecrow. My mind saw Thomas Ashton on his pillar of stone, made into something not human. Tell Henderson to lock his doors, I said, and to stay inside. I am on my way. Is there anyone with him? I said. Negative. He lives alone. Understood, I said. No more radio unless it is urgent. Miller is off his shift. I will take this. I knew there was a risk in it, but if this was what I thought it was, bringing in a deputy, even a seasoned one, might just complicate things. This artist, he might enjoy a witness, but perhaps not a crowd. The drive was more than an hour. The darkness had taken full possession of the desert when I reached the edge of Henderson's land, a fence of barbed wire that sagged between its posts. The only light was the sweep of my truck's headlamps across the waste. His cabin was a small dark shape, a single point of fear in that great emptiness. I cut the engine and the lights and I listened. There was nothing, only the crickets sawing in the scrub and the small sound of the wind moving through the salt bush. I took my heavy flashlight from the seat and my sidearm, and I walked toward the cabin. Mr. Henderson, I called out, my voice low. Sheriff's Department. Detective Cole. A voice came from behind a window boarded over with old wood. It shook. You come alone? Yes, sir, I said. Just me. Are you all right? The thing, he said. In the west paddock. You got to see it. All right, Mr. Henderson. You stay inside. I am going to look. Just show me the way. A hand, palsied and thin, came through a crack in the boards, pointed to the west. Out past the old tractor, he said. Near the bones. Bones. I nodded, though he could not see it in the dark. Stay put, I said. The west paddock was a flat place of cracked earth. The skeletons of what might have been Joshua trees stood like markers. My flashlight cut a white path through the darkness. I saw the shape of an old tractor, its iron body rusted and canted to one side. And beyond it, at first it looked only as he said, a scarecrow made ragged by the weather. A tall frame of sticks, with torn clothes that flapped in the night wind. But as I came closer, the beam of my light settling on it, the true shape of it began to show itself, and the air I drew into my lungs felt like ice. It was not just different. This scarecrow was not made of straw and old cloth stuffed onto a wooden cross. The frame was wood, yes, but it was not a simple cross. It was made more intricate, like an effigy to some dark god. And lashed to this frame with strands of rusty baling wire that caught the light from my lamp was a human form. A woman. She was smaller than Ashton, her bones more delicate, but she was as desiccated as he, her skin drawn tight and thin like old parchment over the frame of her. Her arms were not outstretched in the common way of scarecrows. They were bent and twisted upwards. The thin fingers of her hands spread wide against the great dark vault of the sky with its uncounted stars, as if she were frozen in some last silent plea to a deaf heaven. Her clothes were a dress of faded flowers, torn and arranged upon her with a kind of awful artistry. But where the head of a scarecrow would be a sack of cloth, her head was bare. It was tilted back, her mouth open as if in a scream that had been caught and mummified in her throat. And the things that had been added to her. My God, the things, wisps of dried tumbleweed, gray and brittle, had been woven into her hair, so that it formed a wild corona about her head, like the snakes of Medusa. In the hollows of her eyes there was no clay. There were round, flat pieces of turquoise, set carefully into the sockets. Her lips, drawn back from gums that were dry and hard, were stained a deep and unnatural red, a color that might have come from crushed berries or from some powdered stone. But the worst of it, the thing that made my stomach tighten in a cold knot and the hairs on my arms rise up, was what lay arranged around her on the ground. The bones Henderson had spoken of. Skulls. The small skulls of desert animals. Coyotes and jackrabbits. Birds. Even the skull of a gopher. There were dozens of them. They had been laid out in a perfect spiral on the cracked earth around the foot of the effigy, a spiral that tightened as it reached her bare, mummified feet. Each skull was turned to face her, looking inward, as if they were a silent congregation of skeletons come to worship at her altar. I took a step back. The beam of my flashlight wavered. This was not just murder. This was not what he had made of Ashton. This was a ritual. This was a form of worship, and a new horror took root in my chest. This woman, she could not have been here for more than a day, perhaps two. He was working faster now. He was growing bolder. His theater was becoming more grand. I swept the beam of my light around the silent paddock. The wind sighed. It carried the faint, dry scent of creosote and sage. And beneath it, that other scent, faint and acrid, that I had known before. He could be out there in the darkness, watching me, waiting to see what I would make of his new work. My hand went to the butt of the Sig Sauer at my hip. The silence of the desert was no longer a peaceful thing. It was a silence that waited, and I was standing in the middle of his gallery. The beam of my light held the woman in Henderson's west paddock. I keyed the radio. Sandy, it's Mac. Her voice came back quick and with a wire in it. Mac, he said, you found it. Henderson, He will not be still. Yeah, I found it. Sandy, listen carefully. I need a full team out here at dawn. Forensics, backup, the me. Until then, I need you to tell Mr. Henderson to stay locked inside and not come out for any reason. And patch me through to Sheriff Brody, his home line. Wake him if you have to. Copy that, Mac. On it, she said. I brought the truck closer and set the work lights to throw their hard glare upon that place. But I kept them from the ground. I photographed the woman from all quarters. My breath smoked in the cooling air. The care of it was a thing to see up close, the wire turned with a knot he had used before, a specific and looping tie. The woman was younger than the man at Coyote Jaw. Late 20s perhaps. No name for her yet. The sun and whatever chemicals he had used had drawn the flesh tight to the bone, so that she was a thing of leather and wood and wire. The tumbleweed was woven through her dark hair so it stood out like horns touched by a mad wind, a cruel halo against the black sky. And in her eyes he had set polished stones, round and flat, the color of the deep sky at noon, and they caught the light, high-grade turquoise. Brody's voice, when Sandy patched me to his house, was thick with sleep, but it cleared. Another one, Mac, as bad as the first. Worse, Sheriff. Different, more performative. This one feels like it's addressed to someone. The dawn came up gray and pitiless on that country, and with it came the cars of the county. The forensics men moved quiet about their work, their voices low in the face of it. Dr. Ramirez wore a face like a stone carving as she began her preliminary on-site examination. Old Henderson was led from his house, and he would not turn his eyes to the west field. I looked again at the skulls set about her feet. Clean bone, sun-bleached, each one facing the woman on her strange crucifix. Dr. Ramirez spoke beside me, her voice low as she examined the stones in the woman's eyes. Notice anything odd about the materials, Mac? Ramirez asked, as she gently probed one of the turquoise eye coverings with a gloved finger. This turquoise isn't the cheap stuff you find in roadside souvenir shops. This is old mine quality, specific veins. Bisbee blue, maybe, or sleeping beauty, though that's rarer this far south. My mind started to click. Bisbee and sleeping beauty mines were hundreds of miles away, too far for casual acquisition by a desert loner. Anything local that would match? Ramirez shrugged. Most of the old claims around here played out decades ago. They were small operations, but there are stories. Some of the really remote box canyons up in the Diablo Range, near the Twisted Sisters Peaks. Local prospectors swore there were untouched veins of gem-grade turquoise up there. Hard to get to, treacherous terrain. The Diablo Range, Twisted Sisters. I knew the area. A broken country of canyons that cut deep and ridges like the bones of some old dead beast. Cell service did not reach there. No help comes there for a man who finds himself lost. And the small owl whose skull lay among the others, Ramirez said its kind nested in those high canyons, nowhere else in this county. Over the next 24 hours, we canvassed known turquoise claims and rockhound haunts, but the Diablo Range theory solidified. The type of animal skulls also began to create a more refined geographical profile when cross-referenced with specific habitats. A particular subspecies of ground owl, whose tiny skull was nestled amongst the others, predominantly nested in the higher altitude rock formations found within the Diablo Canyons. The second victim was identified as Sarah Kim, a geology student from UNM, reported overdue from a solo mapping expedition in the Diablos a week ago. She hadn't even been officially listed as missing until yesterday, her check-in window having just expired. Her car was found abandoned at a little-used trailhead leading directly towards the Twisted Sisters Peaks, precisely where the high-grade turquoise veins and unique ground owl habitats converged. He had not made his work of her there where she fell. He had brought her down from the mountains to Henderson's flat land and set her up for us to see, a signpost in the desolation. He had made Ashton for practice to learn his craft. But this woman, she was a map. He drew the lines and he set the markers for me to read. as if he knew the man who would come looking, as if he expected a certain eye to follow his sign. "He wants me to find him, Sheriff," I said, standing in Brody's office, the preliminary report on Sarah Kim in my hand. "These aren't random victims anymore, and their placement isn't random. He's leaving clues, geographical markers." The sheriff looked at the report on the woman, Sarah Kim, and the lines in his face were deep. "And you think this workshop of his is up in the Diablos?" "I'm almost certain of it. The turquoise, the specific owls, Sarah Kim's last known location. It all points to those canyons around Twisted Sisters. That's suicide. Mac going in there after him. That's his home turf. We can set up a perimeter, maybe use a helicopter for aerial recon. If he even has a fixed base, we could search those canyons for weeks and find nothing. He's moving his victims. He knows the terrain too well. By the time a full search team is organized and deployed effectively, he'll have vanished or worse, taken another life. No, if I go in quiet, alone, he might just lead me to wherever he feels most comfortable, most powerful. It's a risk, a huge one, but..." Brody put his hand flat on the wood of his desk and he stared at it. After a time he said, "But you feel it's the only way to get ahead of him." He stared at me for a long moment. "All right, Mac, all right, but you go in with full comms as long as they last. Check in every 30 minutes once you're past the trailhead. One missed check-in, and I'm sending in everything we've got. Protocols be damned." "Understood," I said. The sun was falling toward the western mountains when I turned the truck toward the Diablos. The good road ran out, and then the graded dirt ran out, and then it was a track among the stones that clawed at the tires. The land rose up in walls of stone, ancient and brooding, and the air in that place felt older, holding a charge. I parked my truck near the same deserted trailhead where Sarah Kim had left hers. I took a deep breath. I took my pack and the rifle and my sidearm and extra water. I stood a moment where the trail began, a faint depression in the gravel and rock. Only the wind moved through the narrow rock passages with a sighing sound. Sarah Kim's tire tracks were there, already faded by that wind. There was no other sign. I went into the canyon. The stone walls climbed into the failing light, streaked with ochre and crimson and the green sickness of copper where turquoise might be found. The gravel turned under my boots and the sound was loud in that great silence. My radio crackled a last time before the stone would take the signal. "Unit 12, what's your 20? Sandy's voice. "At the Twisted Sisters trailhead, Sandy," I said. "Entering Diablo Canyon now. Beginning 30-minute check-ins." "Copy that, Mac. Godspeed." I thought, yes, Godspeed. I need it. And I went on into the dark where he waited, or where he did not. But he knew the way of my coming. I was walking into his country, into the stone heart of his work. He had the place chosen, and he had the shape of the thing he would make of what I brought him, which was myself. The canyon became a stricture in the rock, and the walls drew in upon me so tight that I was able to lay hands to stone on either side with my arms stretched wide. The air held a chill as of a cellar cut from the mountain, heavy with the damp scent of unlit earth and something more, a taste of metal and chemicals raw in the throat that overlaid the dead dust of the place and the breath of its old decay. The wind that had moved with some life in the upper reaches was dead here. There was only a great stillness and the sound of water weeping from hidden seams within the stone. The light failed within the deepening stone. I traded the flood of the hand lamp for the harder beam upon the rifle, a spear of light that drove into the gloom before me but left the world to either side in greater shadow. The smallest sound of my passage, the whisper of cloth or the grit of a boot sole upon the rock, came back from the stone walls magnified and ill-omened, so that I moved like a man beating a drum in that silence, announcing his coming. The 30-minute transmissions to Sandy were terse, my voice tight in my own ears, still moving west into Diablo's main gorge. Nothing to report, yet the hairs on my neck stood for what I did not see, and a knowledge grew in me that I was being watched. Then the signs appeared, set forth upon the rock as markers. A stone rounded like a dark egg upon a high shelf where no stone should be, and it gave off a faint sheen as of some hoary luminescence or the very damp of the grave. A posy of dried desert sage tied with that same deliberate loop and twist of old wire that had bound the woman at Henderson's ruin. And then the rock turned sharp upon itself, and the beam found a spray of raven feathers black against the pale stone, pinned there with slivers of bone driven into the crevices. And at the tip of each feather a chip of blue stone was affixed, gleaming like a mad eye. The narrows gave way then to a hollow in the stone, a kind of grotto no more than 20 feet from wall to wall, roofed over by the mountain itself. And I saw his place. My breath went still in my chest. I had schooled myself for what might be there, but the thing itself was beyond the geometries of any sane man's imagining. It was a small space, along the far wall shelves of weathered wood, wrack of some ancient flood, and stones balanced one upon another in defiance of their nature, were laden with the tools of his artifice. Chisels from some old mine, hammered and honed to a cruel edge. Sinew of animals, dried and coiled like snakes, all shaped from bone. Buckets held clays of different earth, dun and ochre and a black like night. Pouches of powdered pigment. Cholya segments lay in rows, their spines clipped with a terrible care. And jars, glass jars holding liquids of a strange color, and in them swam shapes I would not name, fragments of things, feather and tooth and hair, and what looked to be the parings of human nails. But the altar of that place was a slab of sandstone at its center, and upon it pulsed a light not of this earth. Great fungi he had brought from some deeper dark clung to the rock nearby, and their ghostly luminescence lit the slab and what lay upon it. Polished stones, flakes of obsidian, black and sharp, and human bones. The long bones of legs, a femur, a tibia, a collarbone like a piece of white porcelain, all cleaned, burnished, with small holes drilled into their surfaces as if for stringing. From the cracks in the rock walls hung his other works, his sketches in flesh and bone. The carcass of a coyote, dried and stretched, its ribcage broken open and packed tight with glittering quartz crystals. A thing made of bird wings and the skulls of small beasts, all wired together to turn and shift in some breath of air I could not feel. It was a charnel house and the atelier of a demon. I could smell the iron scent of old blood and the sharp bite of his chemicals, and a sweetness too, the cloying perfume of rot held in careful stasis. I swept the rifle's beam into the deeper shadows. "All right," I said. My voice was a rasp in that dead air. "I know you are here. Show yourself." Nothing. Only the ceaseless drip of water that measured out eternity. Then a sound scraped stone behind me. I spun with the rifle, my finger at the trigger's curve, and he stood there in the mouth of the passage where I had entered, a figure dark against the lesser dark of the canyon beyond. He blocked the only exit. He was tall and built of wire and bone, and his clothes were the color of the dried earth that he seemed a thing come forth from the rock itself. He held no weapon that I could see, but his hands were there before him, dark with clay and with some other substance, older and blacker. His face was lost to the shadow, but his gaze I felt upon me, a pressure. "You appreciate it, detective." His voice was a soft and reedy thing, not the growl of a beast but some dry rustle, the voice of a man certain in his vision. Not many can see the beauty in transformation, the way the desert takes, and the way I help it along. "Beauty," I said, the rifle steady on his heart. "Ashton,
Sarakimo.
is that what you call beauty?" A nod from the shadows, slow as the turn of a season. "They are constant now, detective, beyond time's reach. Their decay is arrested. I gave them permanence. The desert is a slow artist.
I accelerate.
I refine." He took a step, a small shift of his weight forward into the fungal light. "You stay where you are," I said. He did not listen and came on another step. "You, Detective Cole, Marcus, you understand the land. You see the patterns. I saw it in the way you studied Thomas. You looked up properly, like a connoisseur. Sarah, she was destined for my celestial offering piece. Henderson's scarecrow, you called it? Fitting in its own way. She gazes at the stars I adorned her with. Forever. A chill that had nothing to do with the cave's air moved in my blood. He had heard me. He had been there in the dark paddock at Henderson's, listening. This is not art, I said, my voice a hollow sound. This is murder. This is sickness. There's a difference, he whispered, and then he moved, not at me, but to the side, a lean and sudden motion like a striking snake, his hand outstretched to the rock wall beside the passage. His fingers found some purchase there. A groan of tortured stone came from above me, a deep guttural sound of the mountain shifting in its sleep. The overhang, that roof of rock, dislodged by some hidden lever or rope, began to fall. Tons of stone and ancient earth. Without thinking, I threw myself sideways. I struck the hard floor of the cave and the rifle spun from my grasp. Dust rose in a choking cloud, thick as ash, and the chamber was thrown into a deeper blackness as the fungi's light was buried. I coughed, sucking dust, blind. He was on me before I could draw breath. I did not see him. I smelled him, the scent of the raw earth and the bite of his chemicals and an older, graver stink. A wiry strength, fueled by madness. His fingers, like talons, clawed at my face. I lashed out, connecting with something solid, and heard a grunt. We rolled on the cave floor, a thrashing knot of limbs in the stinking dust. His thumbs found the line of my throat and pressed, and the light behind my eyes burst into novas. I bucked, twisted, my hand flailing on the broken stone, and my fingers closed upon a shard of rock, heavy and sharp-edged. I drove it upward to where I judged his head to be in that blackness. A flat sound, a choked noise. The pressure on my throat eased a hair. I struck again with the stone, and again. He hissed and recoiled from me. I scrambled back, gulping air like a landed fish, my hands sweeping the floor for the rifle, for the hand lamp. Where? You do not see, he rasped, his voice ragged now, shot through with rage. I was going to make you magnificent. A glint in the ruin, what faint light of the disturbed fungi still seeped through the dust. He had armed himself from his table, a long knife of obsidian, polished and wickedly sharp. He came at me then, a shadow wielding a thong of black glass. My hand went to my boot and found the hilt of the K-bar. I drew it as he lunged. I met his charge. Steel struck stone with a screech and a spray of tiny sparks, like angry sprites in the dark. We were too close for any other weapon, locked in that deadly grapple. He moved with a frenzied speed, the obsidian blade a whisper of air before my face, then a line of fire across my left forearm as it bit deep. Pain bloomed, hot and sudden. He made sounds now, low in his throat, like a beast. I ducked under a wide sweep of the black blade that would have opened my throat and drove my shoulder hard into his chest. We went stumbling backward together into the deeper part of the cave, over loose rock, and crashed into his workbench of sandstone. His tools and his jars, his hideous creations, went skittering and smashing to the floor. My collection! He shrieked, momentarily distracted. It was the opening I needed. He turned his head for a split second to survey the damage. I thrust upward with the K-bar. He twisted like a cat, but the blade found him. Not cleanly, glancing off a rib, then sinking deep into his side beneath his arm. He gave a roar, a sound of ultimate outrage and pain, and staggered back from me, his hands clamped to his side. A dark fluid, black in that dim light, poured through his fingers. I gave him no time. I lunged and tackled him, driving him down amongst the ruin of his workshop, amidst the shards of clay and the scattered bones of men and animals. He thrashed beneath me, his strength still a terrible thing, his breath hot on my face, stinking of his own blood. My lamp, I saw it, half buried in the rockfall at the cave's mouth, its beam pointing crookedly to the roof, broken but alive. I could not reach it. He heaved under me, his free hand groping, and closed upon one of the human femurs from his collection. He swung it like a club, and it met my shoulder with a sickening crack of bone. A white and blinding numbness shot down my arm. My grip on the knife loosened. He tried to roll me to gain the top, his eyes burning with a feral light. "The desert," he gasped, blood at his lips. "Accepts your offering." He was strong. God, he was strong. I brought my knee up hard into his wounded side. He screamed, a thin sound, and his back arched. In that instant my eyes, accustomed now to the faint lumina, saw a stone glinting on the floor beside his flailing hand. One of the pieces of blue turquoise he had shown the girl at Henderson's, heavy, angular. As he drew back the femur for another blow, I snatched the turquoise. It filled my hand, heavy, its broken edge sharp. With a grunt that was torn from me by pain and desperation, I brought it down not on his head but upon the wrist of the hand that held the bone. He howled, a sound thin and high and terrible that echoed from the unseeing rock. He was hurt now. I pressed it, striking with the heel of my good hand at his face, again and again, until he went slack beneath me, his breath coming in shallow, ragged pulls. I rolled off him. Every part of me was afire of pain. My arm, my shoulder. I lay there in the dust and the ruin of his madness and breathed the air that was grit and blood and the reek of his chemicals. Above me the stone was indifferent to the affairs of men. His breath beside me was a wet and halting sound that diminished slowly toward silence. With an age of effort I found my K-bar. Then the hand lamp. The lens was cracked but the light held. I turned it upon him. He was younger than I would have thought beneath the grime and the wildness of his eyes, perhaps 30. Those eyes, empty now, still held some ghost of his terrible devotion. Around him lay the broken instruments of his worship, the ruined icons. The turquoise stone lay near his shattered hand, dark with his blood. My radio, it lay in pieces, useless. It took what felt like a lifetime, moving through a fog of pain, to reach the emergency beacon in my pack. My hands trembled. Then there was only the waiting. I leaned against the cold stone. The desert wind had found a way into that tomb, and it sighed a low note through the fallen rock. It did not sound like a lament. It sounded like nothing at all. Time had no measure in that place. It might have been hours before I heard the beating of the helicopter rotors against the air, a sound that came from a world beyond the stone, growing louder. Brody had said he would send what he had. They found me there amongst the detritus of his visions, the man himself a-sprawled, offering a few feet from where I sat. They used words like shock. Perhaps what I felt was a great hollowness, and an age I had not earned. I had lived. He had not. But a piece of me was buried in that dark cleft of rock, with the bones and the clay and the turquoise stained dark. The desert had taken its due, and that beauty which I had known in the stark and silent places, that spare solace of the rock and the sun, it was now overlaid with the memory of this man and what he had made of that solitude, a darker shape within the shadow. The wind still called in the high rocks, but now it carried a different voice. And I knew that in the quiet places when the sun was low I would look for signs in the dust and listen for a footfall that was not my own. And the safety of my weapon would be a familiar thing beneath my hand. Always. When the current administration started cutting National Park Service jobs, my old post at the Everglades abruptly ended. They sacked almost everyone, leaving us with barely enough severance to cover the next month. I was surprised. I was pissed. I was devastated. But my supervisor had already lined up another gig, and he was able to bring one more LE, law enforcement, ranger with him. A week after my dismissal, he called and asked if I wanted to go out for a cup of joe. "You've always been there for me, no matter the situation," Bruce said over a steaming mug of black coffee. My supervisor was a bear of a man. Bushy beard, 6'5", 240 pounds. Built like a lumberjack. I trusted him like a brother. There's nothing more important in this line of work than loyalty. And out of all the rangers at that godforsaken swamp, you were the most devoted. Thank you, I said, unsure of where this was going. Sensing my impatience, Bruce launched into his offer. Look, I've got some friends in the BLM. There's this wildlife preserve, this contract work. 6 months, but there's an opportunity for extension. Are you? Yes, I am, Bruce said. You good to move to Northern California? I didn't have anything tying me to South Florida at the time, but the distance caught me off guard. This was clear across the country, and I wanted to know where I'd be spending the better half of the year. Is it Golden Gate? Visions of the majestic San Francisco Bay flashed before my eyes. The location's classified, Bruce said. It's not a park with visitors. Oh, that sounded ominous. Is it military? Look, all I can tell you right now is it's easy work. The easiest job you've ever had. Oh, and the pay is triple what you made in the Glades.
Yeah.
Sounds great, I said. It's probably in the Bay Area, I thought. The cost of living there is much higher. Bruce slid a nondescript manila folder across the table. I reached out to open it, but he kept his meaty hand flat atop its cover. There's just one thing I need to know before we go any further. I leaned back, suddenly aware of how quiet the coffee shop had grown. Is this some kind of drug thing? I whispered. I knew about a lot of marijuana grow operations up in NorCal. Bruce fixed me with a steely gaze. Meth, he said. I spit up my cappuccino. Whoa, I don't know. But Bruce erupted into a rumbling laugh that was part growl. I'm just fucking with ya, dude. The site's restricted due to environmental concerns, and you just have to sign an NDA before I tell you anything else. Oh, I let out a sigh and opened the folder to an 80-page document of boilerplate legalese. My new post was a wildlife preserve called McNeely Pines. I arrived a few days after signing my NDA. I flew out to Sacramento, then drove for a few hours through winding mountainous roads with nary a town or gas station in sight. I left all traces of civilization far behind and entered the pure, untrammeled wilderness that intimated westward settlers centuries ago. The sun had just set when I finally arrived at the ranger station. It was an old timber-built hunting lodge repurposed by the government, 2 stories tall, with a series of radio antennas sprouting from its roof. There was something off about the place, but it took me a while to realize what. It wasn't until after I'd moved into my room upstairs, taken a nice hot shower, and settled into bed that I noticed all the windows were reinforced with metal bars. Bruce gave me a tour of the property the next day. It was just the 2 of us working the park. Cell reception was spotty, but we had a high-tech comms room in the station for communicating with the outside world if needed. The preserve encompassed 10,000 acres of mountainous forest full of towering pines whose expansive canopies blocked out most sunlight, even in the middle of the day. The forest looked pristine. No trash, no roads, plenty of wildlife, but it was inaccessible. A 15-foot tall chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the whole area. No one was allowed inside except with express permission from the federal government. Before my arrival, Bruce said the location of the preserve had been quarantined, but I never imagined it would be like this. What did they have in there? Mutant grizzly bears? I asked as the 2 of us drove along the perimeter in a park-issued ATV. Deer mostly, Bruce said. It's not just to keep the animals in, but also to keep people out. Now that I was on site, my supervisor could explain the whole situation. Apparently, a railway runs through the McNeely Forest Wildlife Preserve. It's shut down now, but for decades it serviced freight trains. Most carried simple goods, foodstuffs, lumber, sheet metal, but occasionally they transported hazardous materials. One such train was carrying over 200 tons of toxic chemicals, including vinyl chloride, ethylene glycol, ethyl hexyl acrylate, and butyl acrylate, when it derailed in the middle of the forest 5 years ago. The resulting spill covered much of the land. Fortunately, there was no civilization nearby, so the story didn't garner much news outside of a few small articles in local newspapers. After the initial cleanup operation, the EPA ordered a quarantine of the whole forest for at least 20 years, subject to further restrictions if testing didn't improve. Our job's making sure no one except the EPA enters or leaves the forest, Bruce said. The fencing had one gate, located next to the ranger station. Bruce and I were the only ones with the code to open it. Bruce was right. The job was easy. Outside of handling the main gate, I managed a series of trail cameras placed every 100 meters or so along the perimeter fence. The cameras faced both inside and outside the preserve. If I caught anyone trying to break through the fence, I was to arrest them on sight. That was it. The government covered lodging and delivered free groceries every other week, so I was raking in pure profit for almost no work. It was perfect. Still, it left me with a lot of questions. Why did we need so many trail cams? There were literally hundreds watching every inch of the park. I'd never seen so many before, even at larger parks. And this was on top of the daily patrols Bruce and I made in the park ATVs. Furthermore, when I first checked the cameras, I noticed the fencing had odd markings. Nothing major, just this faint script. You could only see it when you were right up against the fence. There were these little scribbles etched into the metal chain links. It looked like some kind of writing, but I couldn't make out any of it. I asked Bruce about it one night. He said the etchings were a company signature. The Park Service hired a special company to make the fence extra strong and resilient against the elements. Anti-rust and whatnot. Jesus, they've spent a fortune on this quarantine operation, I thought. Each evening, I'd upload all the footage from the trail cams and review it for any anomalies. The cameras only captured images if there was movement in the frame, so most of it showed branches swaying in the wind or a squirrel running by the lens. Occasionally, a deer or raccoon would approach the fence from within the quarantine zone. The preserve had a surprising amount of wildlife given its toxic backstory, though the animals never appeared to look or act abnormal. With all the hazardous shit in there, it's a miracle anything's alive. I told Bruce one night as we drank whiskey and watched old episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond. The lodge didn't have internet access, but it came with an expansive collection of DVDs. I dunno. Life's pretty resilient, I guess, he said. No matter what the world puts it through. What we put it through, I said, referring to the toxic spill. Bruce nodded. Still have to put them down if any manage to break through the fencing. Yeah, I said. I didn't relish the thought of shooting mutant deer. The first couple of months were monotonous, checking trail cams, maintaining the ATVs, watching too many episodes of Friends, and every so often letting EPA officials through the main gate. Each week, 2 black SUVs would arrive at the station, and a half-dozen men and women in pristine white hazmat suits would pile out, carrying nondescript equipment boxes. They weren't much for conversation, just running more tests, one of them said. It was the longest sentence any of them had ever spoken to me. I'd input my gate code, and the group would disappear into the seemingly endless forest, sometimes for 30 minutes, sometimes a whole day. Neither Bruce nor I ever accompanied them. What if they need protection? I asked him, thinking about potential animal attacks. They can handle themselves, Bruce replied. The hazmats are enough. I suddenly became aware that neither of us had worn so much as a face mask while patrolling the forest for hours each day. And here were these people in full bodysuits. Should we be wearing anything? Nah, the spill site's far in the interior, Bruce said. We're well outside the range of anything dangerous. That's what they tell us, at least, I said, chuckling. Yeah, true, Bruce laughed. What did you think they do in there for so long? I dunno. Soil samples? A bonfire rager? Who cares, so long as our check's clear, Bruce said. I nodded, but something still felt off. The EPA officials were so deadly serious whenever they arrived, and they always seemed dazed when they returned from their testing. It was like they'd been through the ringer in there. Their blank, expressionless faces reminded me of someone in shock. One day, I noticed a syrupy red liquid leaking from one of their equipment boxes as they exited. I almost asked what it was, but the officials quickly scrambled back into their SUVs and waved goodbye before driving off. It has to be blood, I told Bruce later that night. There's nothing else it could be. Are they killing animals in there and bringing them back to some lab for testing? Look, Bruce set his whiskey down. It's best if you don't dwell on it that much. His demeanor suddenly changed, as if I were bringing up a taboo subject. But this was our job. Don't you want to know what's going on? I asked. I mean, the cleanup's the whole point of this place. Quarantine, clean up the mess, reopen the park to the public. I never said the park would reopen to the public, Bruce said. What? My supervisor just stared at the flames in the lodge's fireplace. The logs popped and crackled. Then, he downed the rest of his whiskey and started up the stairs. I'm going to bed. Make sure you put the fire out before heading up. I'd known Bruce for years, but I'd never seen him like this. Everything was hunky-dory for weeks. We were cracking jokes about toxic deer with superpowers. But the moment I brought up that blood-soaked equipment container, it was like I'd touched a raw nerve. He became standoffish, even a bit sad. At first, I thought my hypothesis was correct, and he was angry about the EPA killing animals for testing. But Bruce was never much of an animal lover. Hell, he ate beef almost every day, so he couldn't be that upset. It had to be something else. Something he wasn't telling me, wouldn't tell me, or maybe I was overthinking things. There's only so much to occupy your mind in the middle of nowhere. Only so many old TV episodes to watch. So many dusty books on wilderness exploration to read. My job was monotonous, repetitive. In such situations, the mind tends to search for meaning, especially when there's a mystery this intriguing. I started my investigation in the comms room. As I mentioned earlier, a big part of my job was reviewing trail camera footage, which I uploaded to a bulky government-issued desktop computer. I was only supposed to review the previous day's footage, but after some digging, I found a folder containing the trail cam archives. There was footage going back to the establishment of the quarantine zone, years before I had arrived. I started with the earliest images. There were no signs of a train crash or fire, but some of the nighttime footage showed human figures staggering out of the forest. They appeared bruised and bloodied, walking in a daze. There were only a couple of them at first, but that number soon expanded to 6, then a dozen, then dozens. What are you doing? I minimized the screen and spun around in my office chair. Bruce had just entered the comms room, re-reviewing footage from last night. It's 6:30. Time for evening rounds, Bruce said. Oh, right. Yeah. I closed out of everything and logged off the computer. Bruce stared at me as I left the room. He knows something's up, I thought. He'll see that I accessed those early files. I wanted to say something, but I figured I would ask Bruce about the footage later that night after he'd had his nightly whiskeys. Maybe that would finally get him talking. When I entered the garage to get the ATV, I noticed a massive pair of bolt cutters hanging from a tool shelf nearby. Bruce said they were for EPA emergencies only, such as if the gate wouldn't open, and we needed to cut an exit for the hazmats. I'd never taken the cutters with me on patrol before. What would be the point? I wasn't going to rescue some mutant deer dying from toxic shock. But that night, I don't know what it was, but something compelled me to grab the tools before heading out. They were heavy, much heavier than normal bolt cutters. I noticed they bore the same odd scribbles as the chain link fence. After grabbing the cutters, I hopped in the ATV. My patrol was to drive the entire park perimeter and check for anything suspicious. There was a service road that ran alongside all 14 miles of fencing. I flipped on the ATV's headlamps. The sun was about to set, and the whole forest was covered in a thick blue gloom. Not quite daylight, not quite night, a half light. I drove along the service road at 10 miles per hour, scanning the area as I went. The air felt thick. The forest sounds were muffled, almost as if everything was underwater. It was an eerie atmosphere, unlike anything I'd felt since arriving at McNeely Pines. I soon found out why. Halfway through my patrol, I heard a voice call out, "Help!" I stopped the ATV, shining a spotlight around the service road. "Hello? Who's there? Help, please." The voice was coming from within the fence. I turned my spotlight to reveal a gaunt figure amid the tall pines. It was a man, mid-40s, skeletal. Ragged clothes barely clung to his emaciated frame. He looked shocked and confused as he staggered towards the fence. "Help me! My God!" I whispered. I got out of the ATV, my hand on the holster of a taser gun. The man looked like a meth addict I'd encountered in the Everglades once. Unpredictable and much stronger than normal. "How'd you get in there? This forest is restricted." "They're keeping us," the man said. His skin was so sallow and pale it almost glowed. "We can't leave. They're horrible. Oh God, they're horrible." "Who's keeping you?" "The demons," the man said. Drool spilled from his lips. "Demons everywhere." "Stay right there," I said. "I'm going to get you help." I returned to the ATV and clicked on my shoulder-mounted radio. "Bruce, come in. I'm at mile marker 12. There's a man inside the fence. Says he's being held prisoner. Looks like he might be on something. Keep him there, but don't engage," Bruce said. "Don't talk to him. Don't even look at him. I'm coming to assist." "Copy that." "Who's that? Who are you talking to?" "Don't let him come here." The man had walked up to the fence, almost close enough to touch it. "Sir, it's going to be okay," I said. "What's your name?" "They don't give us names," the man said. "Only numbers." "Okay, look, just remain calm. Okay? Help is on the way." "No, that man won't help. He'll kill us." I sighed. There was no use arguing with this madman. He's probably some druggy backpacker who wandered a bit too far off the trail and somehow climbed over or dug his way under the fence. Hopefully, he didn't have any exposure to toxic chemicals. I made sure to keep my distance. "We're not supposed to leave the facility or the demons will punish us," the man said. "The demons in white." "Uh-huh," I said, staring at my phone. The ranger station was roughly 6 miles away. It would take Bruce less than half an hour to arrive after he started up the auxiliary ATV. "Please, sir, you have a kind face," the man said. "I know you'll help us. What's your name?" "Us." I looked up to see 2 more emaciated people standing beside the gaunt man. One was a woman in her early 20s, and the other was a scared little girl, no more than 6 years old. "Help us, please," she cried. Tears stained her cheeks. With all 3 of them there, I realized they were wearing similar outfits. Plain, beige shirts with matching beige slacks. They didn't even have shoes, only cheap flip-flops, like the kind you'd wear to a public shower. "Jesus Christ," I said. This was not just some random tweaker. This was something more serious. "Where did you all come from?" "From the facility," the woman said. "What facility?" "We just want to go home." It was the little girl. "Please, sir." She held out her tiny arm. A small, homemade bracelet hung from her bony wrist, just a piece of string with a few buttons as ornaments. "Are you all together?" "We're a family," the gaunt man said, pulling the woman and child close. This was insane. I radioed Bruce again. Bruce, I got a whole family here. There's a woman and a kid. Just don't engage them in any way," Bruce said. "I'll be there as soon as I can." He sounded out of breath. I heard a faint buzzing sound. Was that the ATV engine? "Bruce, you still there?" The radio only crackled in response. "Forget it. He's not going to help us." The woman tugged on the man's shirt, pulling him away from the fence.
No.
I can see the empathy in his face. The man fought to remain where he was. He kept staring at me. I could feel his bloodshot eyes boring into me even as I looked down at my cell phone. It was 8:15 p.m. What was taking Bruce so long? A sudden, gurgling sound drew my attention. Then a woman's scream. I looked up. The little girl had collapsed onto the leafy ground, seizing. Her eyes rolled back as she struggled to breathe.
No.
She's going into anaphylactic shock. The woman grabbed a stick from the ground and shoved it in the girl's mouth. Drool spilled from her lips. She's going to die. The man looked at me, pleading. Do you have a first aid kit? I did. A part of me wanted to radio Bruce one more time, but the girl's condition was getting worse by the second. Her tiny body racked with violent convulsions. I needed to act. Now, I rushed into the back seat of the ATV, grabbing the first aid kit and bolt cutters. Seconds later, I knelt beside the fencing and started to cut. Snip, snip, snip. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Snip. I cut the last chain link and a large section of the fence fell away. As soon as it did, an incredible whoosh of air radiated outward. It was a shockwave that knocked me flat on my ass. My head spun. My consciousness flickered like a static TV signal. But in those fleeting moments of lucidity, I saw the family rush through the opening. We're forever in your debt, the man said before he and his family disappeared into the gloomy woods beyond. I vaguely remember more figures running through the exit afterward, a throng of pale, long-limbed bodies with scythe-like fingers. Then, everything went dark. I awoke in the dirt late the following morning. My mouth was dry, and my head was groggy. Wah? I was still lying beside the fence, which now had a gaping hole. The section I'd cut open was pushed outward as if something massive had squeezed through the gap. I got up. My ATV was still there, but it was dead. The battery juice ran out from running the headlamps all night, and all the gas had burned away. I clicked my shoulder-mounted radio. Bruce? Come in. Bruce. There was no response. Where the hell is he? I ended up walking back to the ranger station. I kept radioing my supervisor every few minutes, but only received errant static in response. I knew something had gone terribly wrong, and my decision to cut open that fence was almost certainly the cause of it. Who were those people asking for my help last night? What was the facility they kept talking about? Were they all on something? Was I on something? Was the whole night some toxic-fueled hallucination brought on by the chemicals in the forest? All I knew for sure was that I'd fucked up. Big time. I'll probably lose my job over this, I thought. When I finally arrived back at the lodge, the front door was ajar, and a few of the windows had been broken open. The iron bars covering them were pulled apart. Only someone powerful could do that. Someone or something. There was an awful stench in the air. Flies buzzed everywhere. I pulled out my service revolver and stepped inside. The place was a war zone. Furniture ripped up, glassware shattered, tables and desks overturned, and blood splattered everywhere. In the center of the room was all that remained of Bruce. His body had been torn apart, limbs severed, chest cavity ripped open. Something had eaten his internal organs while he was still alive. My former supervisor's face was frozen mid-scream, his glassy eyes wide with terror. I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat. This was too much, but it was about to get much, much worse. That's when I saw what Bruce clutched in his cold, dead hands. A blood-stained government report, highly classified. After grabbing some pliers from the tool shed, I pried open his rigor mortis stiffened fingers to access the document. Its contents were somehow more sickening than the carnage that surrounded me. There was no train crash. That was just a cover story to quarantine the area and keep any hunters or tourists out of the woods. The EPA agents I let inside the fence each week were military scientists. They worked at a top-secret research facility deep within McNeely Pines. It didn't even have a name. The report only listed it as the facility. The document had numerous grainy, black and white photos. They showed men, women, and even children in barren cells, heads shaved, emaciated, terrified. There were pages of data detailing horrific experiments, tests involving exposure to experimental neurotoxins. The scientists would monitor each person's degradation to learn just how long it took for someone to go blind, for their teeth to fall out, for their heart to stop. I threw the document across the room in disgust. That's when I saw the shredder. A pile of chewed-up pages lay beneath it. There must have been dozens of documents all cut to ribbons. More evidence of the facility. After searching the rest of the lodge, I realized that the report I'd thrown across the room, the one Bruce clutched as he died, was the last bit of hard evidence of the facility left. He'd destroyed everything else. That was the buzzing sound I heard last night. I went over and picked up the blood-stained document, placing it in my satchel. Then I left the McNeely Pines for good. I drove all night until I found a cheap roadside motel near Yosemite. Once secured in my room, I pulled out the document and photographed each page, uploading them to my Google Drive in case someone burst through the door right then, shot me dead, and burned the document. I needed to make sure this last bit of evidence would remain. As I finally read through the entire report, I noticed that the military had moved on from chemical weapons to arcane ones. The last pages detailed a program involving an ancient Sumerian tablet. There were images of odd scribbles, the same writing etched on the chain-link fencing and bolt cutters. The scientists had performed some sort of blood ritual on one of their subjects, a man in his mid-40s. A grainy black and white photo showed his face. It was the same man who came to me the other night, begging to be let out. The document's last page detailed a procedure where they drained all of this man's blood into a basin made according to ancient specifications. According to the report, a figure rose from the bloody pool an hour later. It was tall and gaunt, and incredibly strong. I'm in that motel room now, debating whether or not to release the full document to the press. It will have to be soon. It won't take long for the government to realize who let their precious assets loose. I wish I could say that I regret what I did. Those things will likely wreak havoc once they find civilization. There will be more casualties, perhaps even innocent ones. But I can't get the images of that frightened family out of my head, pleading for help. No matter what, I know there's still some humanity left inside them. As I drove away from McNeely Pines, I saw one in its true form, 10 feet tall, long-limbed and hairless, with skin like a shark's hide. It smiled at me in recognition, flashing a mouth full of dagger teeth. Then it waved as I drove past. A tiny bracelet hung from its wrist, a string with a few buttons.